Hello guys, welcome to No Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Luna's father tested Harry's blood and revealed he was 60% Fae Prince with immortal powers? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Color of Blood. The Lovegood house looked like someone had built a normal tower, gotten bored halfway through, and decided to see what happened if they just kept stacking things on top without any particular plan. It leaned slightly to the left, wore a weather vane shaped like a dirigible plum, and smelled, even from the garden path, like old paper and something vaguely herbal that Harry couldn't name. Luna had invited him for the weekend with the kind of casual certainty that suggested she'd already decided he was coming before she'd asked. "Dad wants to show you something," she'd said on the Hogwarts Express, her wide silver eyes fixed on the middle distance like she was watching something no one else could see. He's been very excited. He hasn't eaten properly in 3 days, which means it's important. Harry had come, partly because he genuinely liked Luna in a way that was hard to explain to Ron without Ron making a face, and partly because the alternative was another weekend at Grimmauld Place listening to portraits scream at him. Xenophilius Lovegood opened the door before Harry knocked. He was wearing robes the color of a bruised plum, had a smear of something silver on his left cheek, and was vibrating with the specific energy of a man who had not slept because sleeping would mean stopping thinking, and stopping thinking was currently unacceptable. "Harry Potter," he said, like he was confirming something he'd suspected for years. "Yes. Come in, come in. Don't touch the blue bottles on the second step, they're not dangerous, they're just loud." Harry stepped carefully over the blue bottles. Luna drifted past him and up the stairs with a dreamy wave, presumably going to do whatever Luna did when she wasn't being the most perceptive person in any given room. The interior of the tower was exactly what the exterior had promised, densely layered, slightly chaotic, and somehow warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Books were stacked in arrangements that suggested a filing system Harry couldn't decode. Dried things hung from the ceiling. A large printing press occupied one corner like a sleeping metal animal. "Sit," Xenophilius said, gesturing at a chair that was occupied by a stack of papers. He moved the papers without looking at them, set them somewhere else, and began rummaging through a cabinet that appeared to contain, among other things, 3 glass orbs, a folded piece of bark the size of a dinner plate, and what looked like a compass that pointed in 7 directions at once. "Luna said you wanted to show me something," Harry said. "I want to test something." Xenophilius emerged from the cabinet holding a shallow stone bowl that looked very, very old. The interior was etched with symbols Harry didn't recognize, not runes, not ancient Egyptian, not anything from any class he'd ever sat through. They were fluid and layered in a way that made his eyes want to slide sideways. A lineage reveal. Old practice. Predates the ministry, predates Hogwarts, predates most things your textbooks consider foundational. The Fae used it originally. Harry looked at the bowl. Used it for what? To confirm hereditary standing. Which courts a child belonged to. Whether certain traits would manifest. Xenophilius set the bowl on the table with great care and straightened up. His eyes, which were very like Luna's in their unsettling directness, fixed on Harry. "I've wanted to conduct this analysis for 2 years. Luna told me to wait until you were ready. I didn't know I needed to be ready for anything." "You didn't." "Luna did." He said it simply, without drama, and somehow that made it more serious than any dramatic statement would have. "I study bloodlines, Mr. Potter. Not in the way the Death Eaters do, they're interested in purity, which is a small and ugly idea. I'm interested in origin. In what runs beneath the surface of a person's history." He paused. "I've read everything ever written about your family. Everything available, and several things that aren't. There are gaps in the Potter bloodline that have never been satisfactorily explained." Harry felt something stir in his chest. Not quite discomfort. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of something without being able to see the bottom. What kind of gaps? The kind someone made deliberately. Xenophilius held out a small silver pin. 1 drop of blood in the bowl. That's all it requires. Harry looked at the bowl, at the pin, at the old man's face, which held no manipulation in it, only genuine, barely contained scholarly urgency. He thought about what he knew of his family. His parents, dead at one. His grandparents, barely mentioned. A family history that had always felt like a story someone else had edited. He took the pin. Pressed it to his fingertip. Let the single drop fall. It hit the center of the bowl and it didn't spread like blood should. It spread like ink dropped in still water, in rings, in pulses, in branching lines that moved with intention rather than physics. The etched symbols in the bowl lit up, one after another, amber and then gold and then something that wasn't quite a color Harry had a word for, a light that seemed to exist slightly outside the visible spectrum, visible anyway, pressing at the edges of perception. Xenophilius went very still. The light in the bowl kept building. It climbed higher than it should have. It filled the room with warmth that Harry felt not on his skin but somewhere behind his sternum, like a second heartbeat tapping against the first. And then the bowl cracked. Not violently, a single fracture running from the center outward, like a line drawn by a careful hand. The light faded slowly, leaving the symbols still glowing faintly in the stone. Xenophilius sat down. He did it with the deliberate motion of a man who had decided sitting was preferable to falling down. He stared at the bowl for a long moment. Then he picked up a quill, opened a notebook, and began writing in fast, nearly illegible script. Mr. Potter, he said, without looking up. On a scale of 1 to 10, how attached are you to your current understanding of yourself? What? Your identity. Your sense of who you are and what you are. How fixed is it? Harry frowned. Is this about the bowl cracking? Is that bad? The bowl is 400 years old. I have used it on 37 subjects. Xenophilius looked up. It has never cracked before. The bowl cracks when the result exceeds its design parameters. He turned the notebook around so Harry could see it. There were numbers, symbols, the fluid phase script from the bowl's etching, and at the top of the page, circled twice, 60.3% Fey, primary lineage, unseelie adjacent court, immortal bloodline. Harry stared at it. That's, he started. You are not, or not entirely, human, Xenophilius said, with the careful precision of a man who understood the weight of what he was saying and chose to say it anyway. 60.3% of your blood is Fey in origin. The specific signature matches the bloodline of a Fey prince, an immortal line, meaning the traits attached to it do not dilute over generations in the way human magical ability does. They compound. He paused. Someone suppressed it. There's a secondary marker in your blood, a binding, very old, very sophisticated. It's been there since before you were born. The room was quiet. Outside, wind moved through whatever Xenophilius grew in his garden, and it made a sound like music played just out of earshot. Harry's voice came out steady, which surprised him. You're telling me I'm 60% Fey? Yes. And someone bound it? Yes. And my bowl-breaking blood is, what, a prince or something? Heir to an immortal Fey bloodline. Which carries certain implications. Xenophilius hesitated, then clearly decided against softening it. In Fey terms, Mr. Potter, you are royalty. Ancient royalty. The kind of royalty that predates every institution currently claiming authority over you. Harry sat back. He thought about Dumbledore, who knew everything and shared a carefully curated selection. He thought about the prophecy, the Dursleys, the scar on his forehead, the way every adult in his life had been steering him since before he could walk. He thought about all the things he'd never known about his mother's side of the family, the way Petunia flinched from her own history, the way magic in Harry had always felt bigger than the spells could contain, the way the Sorting Hat had sat on his head for nearly 4 minutes and not said a word about what it was sensing. He thought about all of it. He didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt, strangely, like someone had just turned on a light in a room he'd been navigating in the dark. Tell me everything, he said. Xenophilius told him. It took 3 hours, 2 pots of tea, and 1 refill from a bottle of something that tasted like wildflowers and left a warmth in Harry's throat that lasted an hour. Luna came downstairs at some point, folded herself into a chair in the corner with a book, and listened without interrupting, which was her way of showing she thought the conversation was important. The core of it was this: somewhere in the 15th century, a Fey prince, a member of a court older than the British Isles' written history, had taken a human partner. This was not unprecedented in Fey history. It was, however, complicated, because the offspring of such a union carried both fully human magical potential and fully Fey bloodline traits. Not diluted. Both systems, running simultaneously, each feeding the other. The child had been brought into the wizarding world through the mother's line, and the family had been, at some point, thoroughly and deliberately relabeled as simply a very gifted wizarding family. The Potter name appears in records around 1420, Xenophilius said. Prior to that, nothing. No ancestry. No family tree. They simply appear, fully formed, in the English wizarding registers. He tapped his notebook. That's not how families work. Someone created that entry. Someone decided a Fey-descended line was more manageable if it believed itself to be simply magical humans. Why? Harry asked. Fear. Politics. The Fey courts don't answer to the Ministry of Magic. They don't answer to anyone. A human who is primarily Fey, who can claim hereditary standing in those courts, Xenophilius spread his hands. That person is outside every framework the wizarding world uses to manage power. They cannot be registered, cannot be controlled, cannot be bound by laws written for human magic. He paused. They are, essentially, sovereign. Harry turned that word over. Sovereign. He'd spent 5 years being told he was special in ways that always seemed designed to make him useful rather than free. Special enough to be the chosen one, not special enough to be told the truth. This felt different. This felt like a door that opened outward. The binding, he said. The one in my blood. Who put it there? Xenophilius was quiet for a moment. The signature is old, but the casting style is very specific. I've been studying magical signatures for decades. He looked at Harry steadily. It matches Albus Dumbledore. Luna's page turned. Outside, the wind made its music. Harry felt something go very, very still inside him, and in the stillness, something else woke up. It was like a sound below the range of hearing, a vibration in his blood, in the marrow of him, that had always been there and was now, for the first time, being acknowledged. Right, he said. His voice was completely calm. Harry, Luna said from her corner, and she said it the way she said most things, softly, without alarm, but with complete attention. I'm fine, he said. And he was. That was the strange part, he was absolutely fine, in the way that a very still lake is fine, and deep, and full of things you can't see from the surface. I'm just thinking. The binding is suppressive in nature, Xenophilius continued carefully. It hasn't removed your Fey traits, you cannot remove what's in the blood. It's been, muffling them. Slowing the rate of manifestation. I suspect without it, your abilities would have surfaced much earlier and much more, conspicuously. How do I remove it? That's complicated. How complicated? It requires a Fey working. Not wizarding magic. The binding was laid on a Fey bloodline using wizarding magic, which is, well, it's extraordinarily presumptuous, from a Fey perspective. Legally, under Fey court law, it constitutes a violation of hereditary sovereignty. Xenophilius paused. Which means, if the right parties knew about it, it would be a matter of considerable consequence for the person who cast it. Harry looked at him. Are you going to tell the right parties? I write a publication, Xenophilius said, with the careful dignity of a man whose publication was widely considered the journalistic equivalent of a fever dream. I report what I find. It's not my place to decide what to do with it. He hesitated. But I think, Mr. Potter, that you should. Harry nodded. He picked up the cracked bowl, very gently, and looked at the symbols still faintly glowing in the stone. He didn't know how to read them, not yet, but he felt them, in the way you feel a song in another room, familiar before you've ever heard it. He set it back down. Can I come back? Tomorrow. I want to learn more. Xenophilius lit up like someone had put a match to him. I have 17 books on Fey lineage markers alone. I haven't had a student since. He stopped. His face did something complicated. Since my wife. Harry didn't push it. Thank you, Mr. Lovegood. He searched for the right word and couldn't find one big enough. This is the most honest anyone's been with me in my life. Xenophilius waved this off, but he looked pleased in the way people do when they've been seen accurately. Get some sleep. If the binding is weakening, and your results suggest it's been under strain for some time, you may start feeling things tonight. Don't be alarmed. You've always been Fey. It's just that now it knows you know. Harry went to bed in a small guest room on the 3rd floor, which had a window that looked out over a garden full of silver-leafed plants that seemed to move even when there was no wind. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. He'd been awake for roughly 4 minutes when he felt it. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was a warmth that started in his chest and moved outward through his veins, through his fingers, through the soles of his feet. It was the sensation of something immense stirring in a very small space, turning over, flexing in ways that made the air around him feel different, thicker, more present, like the space between objects had texture he hadn't been able to feel before. He held up his hand in the dark. Nothing visible. But he could feel the room. He could feel the garden below, not see it, not hear it, feel it, the way you feel a change in weather pressure before the rain. The silver plants were actually silver, he realized. Not white in moonlight, they produced their own low, silver luminescence, and he could feel that too, like a frequency. He lowered his hand. His heartbeat was steady. Whatever this was, it didn't frighten him. It felt, if he was being honest with himself, like coming home to a place he'd never been but always known was there. He fell asleep watching the light from his own hand paint faint, shifting patterns on the ceiling. In the morning, Luna was already up, sitting at the kitchen table eating toast and reading something that appeared to be a handwritten manuscript. She looked up when Harry came in, looked at his hands, and nodded once, as though he'd confirmed something she'd been waiting patiently to be confirmed. "You're glowing a little," she said. Harry looked down. There was, in fact, a very faint luminescence to his skin in the morning light, not dramatic, not spotlight obvious, but present. A soft, silver-gold warmth, like he'd swallowed a small piece of sunlight and it hadn't quite been absorbed yet. "Does that bother you?" he asked. "No," she said. "I've always been able to see it, actually. It was just fainter before." She offered him the toast plate. "Dad's already in his study. He found 3 more books last night that he wants to show you. He alphabetized them, which means he's very serious. He doesn't usually alphabetize things." Harry sat down. "Luna. How long have you known? Or suspected?" She considered this with genuine thought, tilting her head to one side. "Since 3rd year. You hexed Draco Malfoy in the corridor behind the charms classroom, and the spell was much larger than it should have been, and it smelled like a forest." She took a bite of toast. "Human magic doesn't have a smell. Fey magic does. Dad taught me that." Harry processed this. "You've known since 3rd year and you're only just telling me?" "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, without any guilt about it. "Also, you weren't ready. And I didn't have proof, just an impression. Dad needed to actually run the test to have anything solid." She looked at him with those wide, untroubled eyes. "You're not angry?" "No. You should be, probably. Most people would be. I'm not most people, apparently." Harry looked down at his hands again. In the morning light, the glow was subtler but still there. I'm 60% Fey royalty with a Dumbledore-installed binding suppressing powers I should have had since I was born. He said it plainly, listening to how it sounded. What I am is, interested. Luna smiled, and it was not her usual distant smile but a real one, small and warm and directed at him with full attention. That's exactly the right thing to be. Xenophilius's study was even more of a controlled disaster than the downstairs, but he'd cleared the table and laid out books with the reverence of a man handling relics, which was perhaps what they were. The one he opened first was enormous, bound in something that wasn't leather, the pages so thin they were nearly translucent. The text was in that fluid Fey script, but alongside each passage was a translation in archaic English, added by a careful hand. The courts, Xenophilius said, tracing a passage without touching it. The wizarding world has a broadly inaccurate understanding of Fey civilization. Most people picture Tinker Bell and seasonal dances. The reality is considerably more complex and rather more formidable. He turned to a page that held an illustration, not drawn but somehow grown into the paper, like a relief map. It showed a court of figures that were undeniably beautiful and undeniably not human in ways that went beyond the visual, in ways Harry felt when he looked at them. The Unseelie-adjacent courts are the oldest. They predate the Seelie split. They're not the dark courts, that's a misconception. They're the sovereign courts. Bound to neither light nor shadow, operating under their own law. And my bloodline comes from there, Harry said. From the direct royal line. Xenophilius tapped the page. The prince whose line you carry, he's referred to in these texts as the eternal heir, which is something of a hereditary title rather than an individual name. It passes to the most complete expression of the bloodline in each generation. He looked at Harry. There hasn't been a complete expression in 500 years. Every generation since the line entered the wizarding world has been diluted or, in your case, suppressed. But I'm 60%. 60.3. The highest concentration in the recorded lineage since the original union. He paused. There's a theory, I've had it for years, but only now can I substantiate it, that the suppression may actually have caused a concentrating effect. Like a river dammed. The power built up rather than manifesting gradually. Which means, when the binding breaks, Harry said, following it, it doesn't just release what's there. It releases what's been building. Xenophilius smiled. It was a smile that held a profound respect for what it was describing. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. Show me how to break it. They spent the rest of the morning and most of the afternoon working through it. The binding wasn't simple. Dumbledore, whatever Harry now thought of him, was not a simple man, and he did not do simple magic. It was layered, intricate, woven through Harry's bloodline markers at a cellular level, designed to look like it wasn't there if you didn't know what you were looking for. But Xenophilius had been looking for it for 2 years, and he'd found it, and he understood its structure the way a locksmith understands a lock. The work required to remove it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a battle or a ritual with fire and chanting. It was quiet, precise, internal. Xenophilius walked Harry through what was essentially a form of self-directed Fey working, not using a wand, not using spoken incantation, but using intent, which was apparently the most fundamental force in Fey magic. Not desire, not emotion, intent. Absolute, specific, directed will. Think of it like, picking a lock from the inside, Xenophilius said. The binding is external but it hooks into your native power to sustain itself. If you withdraw your power from it deliberately and completely, if you refuse it the anchor, it collapses on its own. Harry sat in the chair, eyes open, and felt for the binding the way you'd feel for a splinter, not the pain of it but the shape of it, the foreign edge. It took an hour to find it, because it was clever and designed to feel like it belonged there. But it didn't belong there. He knew his own blood, apparently, in ways he hadn't known he knew. When he found the binding's edge, it was obvious in the way a wrong note is obvious, it didn't fit the rest of the music. He looked at it. He felt the warmth in his chest, the deep fey warmth that had woken up last night. He pulled it back, not dramatically, just deliberately, the way you'd unplug something by removing the cord from the wall. The binding unraveled. He felt it go, thread by thread, layer by layer, and then all at once. The windows blew open. Every candle in the study lit simultaneously. The translucent pages of the ancient book rustled even though the air was still. And Harry Potter sat in the chair and breathed, and felt, for the first time in his life, like he was entirely himself, no barriers, no muffling, no careful engineering determining what he was allowed to be. It felt like the first breath after being held underwater. It felt like finally hearing your own name said correctly. Xenophilius was writing furiously. Luna appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea and looked at Harry with the calm attention she brought to everything, and Harry looked back at her, and for just a moment the air between them carried a quality neither of them named, warm and silver and patient, waiting to become something. "How do you feel?" she asked. Harry considered the question properly. The glow on his skin was more obvious now, not alarming, but definite. He could feel the garden below, the soil and roots and the small specific lives in it. He could feel the house, old and settled, the emotional residue of the people who'd laughed and grieved here. He could feel Luna, not intrusively, not invasively, but like a warmth in the room, a distinct, gentle presence that was entirely itself. He could feel, distantly, like a pressure on the edge of sensing, something large and dark moving somewhere in England, turning its attention toward him, and he recognized that too, the way you recognize the smell of a storm before it arrives. He wasn't afraid of it. Not even a little. "Like I've been half asleep for 15 years, he said. "And just woke up." Xenophilius looked up from his notebook with bright, delighted eyes. "Mr. Potter," he said. "The next few weeks are going to be extraordinarily interesting." Harry smiled. It wasn't the tight, press-of-the-lips kind he practiced for press photos and order meetings. It was the real one, the one that was a little dangerous, that said whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. "Good," he said. "I'm tired of boring." Outside, the silver-leafed plants moved in the still air, luminescent and steady, recognizing something that had finally come home. Chapter 2, The weight of old names. The train back to Hogwarts on Sunday evening was half empty, the kind of quiet that settles over carriages when the weekend is done and nobody's quite ready to let go of it. Harry sat across from Luna, his bag on the overhead rack, watching the Scottish countryside blur past in shades of purple and grey, and felt the world differently than he had 48 hours ago. Not dramatically. Not like a film moment where everything sharpens and swells with music. Just, more. More texture to the air, more specificity to the sounds, more awareness of the people in adjacent carriages as warm, breathing presences, each one distinct. The sensation wasn't overwhelming. It was like the difference between looking at a painting in a dim room and then someone turning the lights on. The painting hadn't changed. You were just finally seeing it properly. He'd been quiet most of the journey. Luna hadn't pushed him, which was one of the things Harry had always appreciated about her. She understood the difference between someone who needed drawing out and someone who needed space to think, and she gave him whatever was actually required rather than what she thought was socially expected. He had a lot to think about. Xenophilius had sent him off with 3 books, all of them old enough that handling them felt like a responsibility, all of them covering different aspects of Fey bloodline expression and court law. He'd also given Harry a rolled piece of parchment with his personal notes on the binding, its structure, its origin markers, and the precise signature that matched Dumbledore's magical style. He'd said, very carefully, that Harry should take his time deciding what to do with the information. Harry had smiled and said he already knew what to do with it. Xenophilius had looked at him for a moment and then nodded once, the nod of a man recognizing that the person he was talking to had quietly left the category of child who needs guidance and entered something else. "What are you thinking about?" Luna asked. She was reading, but she asked the question with the ease of someone who could do 2 things at once without either suffering for it. "Dumbledore," Harry said. Luna turned a page. "What about him?" I'm trying to decide if I'm angry. Are you? Harry thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. The honest answer was complicated. There was something in him that had every right to rage. A man he trusted, the man who'd placed him with the Dursleys and sent him back every summer and managed his life from a distance with the precision of someone moving pieces on a board, had also reached into the blood of an infant and tied off something fundamental. Had looked at what Harry was and decided the world was better served by a version of it that was quieter, smaller, easier to aim. But the rage wasn't what he felt. What he felt was colder and more useful than rage. I'm clear, he said. About what happened and what it means. That feels more important right now than being angry. Luna looked at him over the top of her book. That's very Fae of you, actually. Is it? Dad says the Fae don't really do reactive emotion the way humans do. They feel things deeply but they process them differently. More, geological. Slower to surface, much harder to stop once they do. She went back to her book. You've always been a bit like that, actually. You don't panic. You go quiet. Harry looked at his reflection in the window. The glow was controlled now. He'd spent Sunday morning learning the basic management of it, which was less like suppressing it and more like deciding how much of a fire you needed for what you were doing. He'd figured out that it responded to his emotional state and his intent simultaneously, which meant that as long as he was clear about both, it behaved. He was clear about both. I'm going to talk to him tomorrow, Harry said. Dumbledore? Yes. Luna turned another page. I'll pack extra toast in your bag in the morning. Confrontations are better when you've eaten. Harry laughed, a real one, short and surprised, and Luna smiled at her book, and the train carried them through the dark. Hermione and Ron were waiting in the Gryffindor common room when Harry arrived, both of them in that particular state of barely contained concern that meant they'd been talking about him for at least an hour. Ron was leaning back in his armchair with exaggerated casualness that fooled nobody. Hermione was sitting at the table with a book open that she clearly hadn't been reading. Good weekend? Ron asked, going for casual and landing approximately in the vicinity of it. Interesting, Harry said, dropping his bag and sitting down. He'd decided on the train that he was going to tell them. Not everything at once, there was a lot and it needed context, but enough. They were his people. They deserved the truth. Luna's dad showed you something, Hermione said. It wasn't a question. She had the look she got when she'd been running a theory for days and was ready to either confirm or demolish it. She mentioned it before you left. Vaguely, but enough. He ran a bloodline test on me, Harry said. A Fae one. Very old methodology. He paused. The results were significant. Ron sat up slightly. Significant like, good significant or, I'm 60% Fae, Harry said. From an immortal royal bloodline. It's been bound since before I was born, and the binding was cast by Dumbledore. The common room was mostly empty at this hour, just a couple of fourth years asleep in a corner. The fire crackled. Ron stared. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's, she started. True, Harry said. Xenophilius has the analysis, the documentation, the binding signature. It's thorough. He's not making things up. I wasn't going to say he was making things up, Hermione said, with the slightly injured tone of someone who was, in fact, considering saying exactly that. I was going to say that's an enormous claim and there's a lot to unpack. 60%, Ron said, still processing. More Fae than human. Yes. And Dumbledore put a block on it. A suppressive binding. Layers of it, very sophisticated. Cast on my bloodline markers before I was born, which means either my parents knew and agreed, or, Harry stopped. He'd been sitting with that particular possibility since yesterday and hadn't finished working through it. Or they didn't know. That landed heavily. Hermione's expression shifted from academic skepticism into something more careful, more genuine. She had, Harry knew, enormous affection for the concept of Dumbledore, not blind worship, but the deep respect a person develops for someone who has always seemed to occupy the role of ultimate authority. Having that complicated was hard for her. He could see her doing it in real time, the way she did all difficult thinking, with visible effort and absolute thoroughness. Harry, she said, and now she was just Hermione, not Hermione preparing an argument. Are you okay? I removed the binding, Harry said. Yesterday afternoon. Mr. Lovegood walked me through it. Ron made a sound. You just, removed it, yes. And what's different? Do you feel, Ron made a vague gesture that was presumably meant to convey magically royal and immortal. I feel like myself, Harry said. For the first time, actually. Properly. He looked down at his hands. He wasn't showing the glow actively, but he let a thread of it surface, just enough to be visible, a soft silver gold warmth that moved under his skin like light through deep water. Ron leaned forward, fascinated. Hermione stared. That's not any kind of magic I've read about, she said. No. It wouldn't be. Your books don't cover it. She absorbed this with visible difficulty. Hermione's relationship with knowledge was profound enough that being told there was a whole category of it outside her library was genuinely uncomfortable for her. But she was also, at her core, someone whose loyalty ran deeper than her comfort zone. What are you going to do? She asked. Talk to Dumbledore tomorrow. Find out if my parents knew. Find out what he tells me. Harry let the glow settle back beneath his skin. And then work out what the Fey connection means, courts, heritage, what I'm apparently heir to. All of it at once, Ron said. The binding's been off for a day and there's already, Harry paused, choosing words. There's a pressure. Like something big trying to find where I am. I don't think I have the luxury of doing this slowly. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look. The kind of look that contained an entire conversation. Then Ron looked at Harry and said, right. What do you need from us? It was, Harry thought, exactly the right question. Not are you sure or should you really or perhaps we should consult. Just, what do you need? It was why Ron was his best friend and probably always would be. Right now. Sleep, Harry said. Tomorrow's going to require it. He woke at 3 in the morning with the certainty that something had changed. Not a sound, not a visible disturbance, a shift in the quality of the night, like a frequency that cut off mid-broadcast. He sat up in bed in the dark dormitory and felt outward with his new, unbuffered senses. There it was. That dark pressure he'd felt in the Lovegood garden, the large and distant thing that had turned its attention toward him. It was closer now, not here, not in the castle, but oriented. Like a compass needle swinging toward north. Something was aware of him. Something that had been waiting for this particular frequency to appear, and had just detected it. He already knew what it was. He lay back down and stared at the bed curtain and thought about Voldemort learning that the binding on Harry Potter's blood had just come off. About what that would mean to someone who'd survived his own death through magical extremity, who'd turned his own soul into anchors against oblivion, who understood, better than anyone in the wizarding world, what it meant to pursue immortality. Harry wasn't afraid. He was, if anything, more awake. Sharper. The way a sword gets when it's been properly sharpened rather than left to rust. He fell back asleep at 4, and he didn't dream. Dumbledore's office looked the same as it always did, warm, layered, deliberately comfortable in the way that expensive hotels are deliberately comfortable, engineered to put you at ease. The portraits of previous headmasters dozed in their frames or watched with carefully maintained neutrality. Fawkes, on his perch, opened one eye when Harry entered and made a low, particular sound, not his usual trill, but something older and quieter. Recognition, maybe. Harry sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk without being invited to sit. He noted the slight adjustment in Dumbledore's expression, a barely visible recalibration, like a musician hearing a familiar piece played at a different tempo. He was very good at these small recalibrations, Dumbledore. Harry had always admired it and only now understood it for what it was, the practiced poise of a man who managed people. "Harry," Dumbledore said, warm and unhurried. "You had an eventful weekend, I understand." "Did you know I'd gone to the Love Goods?" Harry asked. "I find it useful to know where my students are." A gentle smile. The beard, the half-moon spectacles, the worn purple robes, all of it, Harry thought, was a kind of performance. Not dishonest, exactly. Just carefully assembled. Xenophilius Lovegood is a singular man. A genuine scholar, despite the somewhat unconventional presentation of his work. "He ran a Fey lineage analysis on me," Harry said. "Using a 400-year-old stone bowl." He held Dumbledore's gaze without blinking. "You already know what it found, don't you?" The fire crackled. Fawkes made that soft sound again. The portraits had all stopped pretending to be asleep. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and this was different from his usual thoughtful pauses, which were part of the performance. This one was real. He was actually deciding something. "Yes," he said. Harry felt something shift in the room. The temperature didn't change. The light didn't change. But something shifted, as though the air had just clarified. "Tell me," he said. "All of it. Not a careful version, all of it." "Harry, I removed the binding yesterday," Harry said. "So we can skip the part where you explain why it was necessary and move directly to, my parents." "Did they know?" Dumbledore's face did something complicated and genuine, the first genuinely unmanaged expression Harry had seen from him. It was grief. Real, old grief, the kind that settled into permanence. "Your mother," he said. "Lily knew." Harry absorbed that. "And my father?" James knew that Lily carried Fey heritage. He did not know the extent of it. Not until, Dumbledore stopped. He took off his glasses and held them in both hands, a gesture Harry had never seen from him. "Not until you were born." "What happened when he found out?" He was, Dumbledore searched for the word. Overwhelmed. Not by the heritage itself. James Potter was many things, and narrow-minded was never among them. He was overwhelmed by the implications. A child who was 60% Fey, born in the middle of a war, with a Dark Lord who had already demonstrated his willingness to target unusual power, he set his glasses back on. "We discussed it. Your parents and I. At length. And you all decided together that binding their infant child's fundamental nature was the right call," Harry said. His voice was perfectly level. Not cold, not accusing, just accurate. "We decided that a visible manifestation of extraordinary Fey power in a newborn child, in a war zone, surrounded by enemies, would be more dangerous than the truth." Harry stood up. He hadn't planned to, it just happened, the Fey in him apparently preferring to be on its feet for this particular conversation, and Harry had no objection to that. "I understand the logic. I can see the entire argument from where I'm standing. You were protecting me from something real." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "And you kept protecting me from it until I was 15. And you never told me. You weren't ready, that's not your decision." Harry said it simply, without heat, and it landed harder than shouting would have. "When to be ready. That's mine." He watched Dumbledore's face and saw the thing he'd suspected, the man actually believed it. Believed, genuinely, that the management had been care. That the curation had been protection. That deciding what a person got to know about themselves was an act of love. "You're angry," Dumbledore said. "No," Harry said. "I'm clear. I told you, there's a difference." He picked up his bag. "I'm going to find out everything about my Fey heritage. I'm going to contact the courts, if there's a way to do that, and I'm going to understand what I actually am. I'm not going to ask your permission for any of it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And there it was, a new thing in those famously wise blue eyes. Not quite alarm. Not quite respect. Something between them, something that arrived when a person realizes that the piece they've been managing on their board has just become a player. "Harry," he said, quietly. "Please be careful. The courts, the old courts, are not simple. Their politics are ancient and I'll figure it out," Harry said. "I tend to." He left without waiting for an answer. In the corridor outside, he leaned against the stone wall and took a breath. His hands were steady. The glow was calm and settled, no agitation in it. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was aware that he'd just walked out of a conversation with Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in Britain, his headmaster, the man who'd been the de facto architect of his entire life, and the dominant feeling was not triumph, not fear, not any dramatic surge. Just, resolution. A road he now understood the shape of. He pushed off the wall and headed toward the library. If he was going to understand his heritage, he needed sources. The books Xenophilius had given him were a start, but they were general frameworks. He needed specifics, court structures, hereditary law, the history of Fey human lineages, and, ideally, some way of making contact with whatever part of the Fey world might actually acknowledge what he was. Madame Pansa's domain was nearly empty this early in the morning, just a few Ravenclaws in the back with scrolls of parchment. Harry went to the restricted section, not sneaking, not using the cloak, just walking in with the absolute certainty of someone who belonged wherever they chose to be, and stood among the older shelves, running his fingers along spines. He felt it before he saw it. A pull, faint and specific, like a magnet's edge, a book near the bottom of the stack, unremarkable in its binding, dusty in the way something gets when it hasn't been opened in a very long time. He pulled it out and opened it, and the script inside was the fluid Fey writing, but after 3 pages it switched into something he could read, archaic but legible, the same careful translation hand he'd seen in Xenophilius's book. A primer on hereditary sovereignty of the old courts, with notes on summoning protocol. Harry sat cross-legged on the floor between the shelves and started reading. An hour later, Hermione found him. She stood over him with the expression she reserved for people who broke library protocol, then looked at the book in his hands, and the expression softened into something more complicated. "Restricted section," she said. "I know. You didn't sign out a permission slip." "I didn't need one." She crouched down beside him. The pragmatism in her won over the protocol, it usually did, in the end. "What are you reading?" "Court Summoning Protocol," Harry said. Apparently if someone from a recognized bloodline wants to make contact with the court that bloodline belongs to, there's a formal method. It's not simple. He showed her a passage. She read it with the focused intensity she brought to all text, lips slightly pressed together. "An intent declaration," she read. "Made in the old language, confirmed with blood. You'd think after the bull yesterday you'd have had enough of that, witnessed by someone of the same bloodline or a recognized scholar of Fey heritage." She looked up. "Xenophilius qualifies for the third. But you don't have someone of the same bloodline." "I'm the bloodline," Harry said. "I'm the entire active expression of it. As far as I can tell, the suppression over 500 years means I'm the only one this concentrated." Hermione was quiet for a moment. She was working through something, he could tell, not just the academic puzzle but something larger. He waited. "I owe you an apology," she said. Harry looked at her. "For what?" "Last night. I was thinking about the analysis, and whether Xenophilius's methodology was sound, and whether there might be an alternative explanation." She stopped. "I was doing what I always do, which is process things academically first and let the actual human part catch up later. You told me your entire understanding of yourself had changed and I started questioning the methodology." "Hermione. It's fine." "It's not, actually." She sat down fully on the floor next to him, which was, for Hermione, a significant commitment. "This is enormous, Harry. Not just not just the power implications or the political implications. You. The fact that everything you've been told about yourself has been filtered and managed and, she stopped again. I'm angry on your behalf, I think. You can be angry, Harry said. I told Ron, I'm not doing anger right now. But you can hold some for me if you need to. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something else. You're not even, you're genuinely fine, aren't you? Not performing fine. Actually fine. I woke up for the first time, he said simply. It's hard to be devastated when you feel like you've finally arrived somewhere. Hermione looked at him for a long moment and he felt her, just faintly, the way he could feel all of them now, her warmth and her steadiness and the specific quality of her caring, which was thorough and loyal and occasionally maddening. What can I do? She asked. Help me prepare for the intent declaration. I need to understand the language protocol and the ceremonial elements. Xenophilius can guide the actual execution, but I want to understand it before I stand in front of it. She was already reaching for the book. Obviously. She scanned the passage again. This says the declaration needs to be made at a threshold point, somewhere that sits between the mundane and non-mundane worlds. A boundary. She frowned. Hogwarts should have several. The forest, obviously, the edge of the Black Lake, Harry said. He knew it, suddenly, the way he'd been knowing things since the binding came off, not information he'd read but something felt, something the Fey blood recognized. There's something there. Old, underneath the water. A seam. Hermione stared at him. You can feel that? I could feel the garden at the Lovegood house. The roots and the small lives in the soil. He considered how to explain it. It's not telepathy or anything dramatic. It's more like, you know how you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm? Like that. But for everything. She stared at him for another moment. Then she looked back at the book. The Black Lake, then. Tonight, after dark, at the water's edge. Her voice was steady and purposeful, and Harry thought, not for the first time, that there was no one better to have in your corner when something needed doing properly. Ron appeared at lunch with 2 sandwiches and a look of concentrated curiosity. Harry updated him over food, keeping it efficient, covering the Dumbledore meeting, the restricted section find, the plan for the evening. Ron listened, ate, and at the end said, "So Dumbledore's known your whole life?" "Yes." "And your mum helped decide it?" "Yes." Ron was quiet for a moment. He had a way of getting to the emotional core of things that he didn't talk about much because it embarrassed him, but Harry had always known it was there. That must be, he stopped. Hard. To know she knew and never told you. Harry looked at the table. She was protecting me. I believe that. The choice is, harder to make peace with than the intention behind it. He paused. But she's gone, so the conversation I can't have isn't with her. It's with Dumbledore, and I've had it, and now I'm moving forward. Right. Ron nodded. What do I do tonight? Come and watch. And if something goes wrong, what could go wrong? I have no idea. That's why I want you there. The afternoon passed in a blur of classes that felt, for the first time in years, genuinely small in comparison to everything outside them. In potions, Snape's gaze lingered on Harry with a new, unreadable calculation. The man was perceptive enough to notice the difference in Harry's bearing without being able to name it, which seemed to unsettle him in quiet ways. Harry returned the look without expression and went back to his potion, which turned out to be perfect without conscious effort, the Fey precision in his hands apparently translating to extremely controlled ingredient adding. In defense, Umbridge was in one of her particularly vicious administrative moods, trying to bait Harry into an infraction. Harry looked at her across the classroom and felt something interesting, a clarity about the exact dimensions of her pettiness, the fear underneath her cruelty, the way her authority was scaffolded on borrowed framework that would collapse the moment anyone looked at it directly. He smiled at her pleasantly and answered every question correctly and left her with nothing to grip. She watched him leave the classroom with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and was actually something else. Something closer to uncertain. Good, Harry thought. Get used to it. At midnight, they were at the edge of the Black Lake. The night was cold and clear, the stars very bright over the water, and the lake itself was that particular midnight black that suggested depth rather than showing it. The shore was rocky and silent. Harry could feel the seam strongly now, a line in reality, thin as a page edge, where the ordinary stopped and something older began. The water wasn't the boundary. The boundary ran through the water, through the rocks, through the air above it, a threshold that existed in the conceptual space between worlds rather than any physical one. Hermione had spent the afternoon memorizing the language protocol. Ron stood slightly behind them both with his wand in his hand in the way he stood when he was ready to do something without yet knowing what it would be, reassuringly solid, consistently present. Luna was there too, which Harry hadn't expected but which made complete sense once he saw her. She'd come silently, without announcement, standing at the water's edge in her nightgown with bare feet on the cold rock, and the water reflected the starlight and the faint silver glow she seemed to generate when she was paying close attention to something. "Dad would want to be here," she said, "but I think this needed to be just us." Harry looked at her. The moonlight on her face and the silver light of the lake combined to make her look like she was slightly outside ordinary time, which maybe she always was. "Thanks for telling your father about me," he said. 2 years ago. For waiting. You needed to be ready," she said again. "You are now." He faced the water. He had the book's language in his head. Hermione had read it to him 6 times, with the exact pronunciation notes alongside, and it was there, clear and available. The intent declaration wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic in its structure. It was precise, a statement of blood, name, lineage, and intent, that last word being the hinge on which the whole thing turned. He pressed the same finger, the one with the pinprick from 2 days ago, healed now to a tiny pale mark, and didn't need a pin this time. He just meant for it to open, and it did. A small, clean cut, no pain, a single drop falling onto the rock between his feet. The drop hit the stone and caught the faint luminescence from his skin and the star reflection from the water and became something that was all three at once, blood and light and reflection, and spread outward in those ring pulses he'd seen in the bowl, except this time they didn't stop at the bowl's edge. They spread to the water. They spread into it. He spoke the declaration. The language was one he'd never studied and understood completely, the way you understand your own name in any language, not translated, just known. His voice on the night air had a quality that wasn't loudness but was somehow larger than quiet, a resonance that the water took up and carried. The lake went still. Absolutely still, every ripple stopped, the surface like glass. Then something below the surface lit up, deep, deep below, a slow amber pulse that corresponded exactly to the rhythm of the declaration's last phrase, the way a call finds an answer. It rose through the water, that light, not quickly but with the certainty of something that had been waiting a very long time for a specific frequency and had just heard it. It didn't break the surface. It just sat beneath it, that amber warmth, steady and present, like a held breath. And then, not a voice, not exactly, but something that functioned as a message, conveyed the way the warmth in his chest conveyed things, a communication, received. Acknowledged. Heard. Come when you are ready, Prince. The lake returned to its ordinary black. The warmth in his chest sat bright and steady. Behind him, Ron let out a breath. Hermione was gripping her wand with both hands and staring at the water with the expression she reserved for things that were definitively outside her books. Luna looked at the spot where the light had been and smiled. "They knew," she said. "They've always known. They were waiting to see if you'd look." Harry stood at the water's edge and felt the night around him, the lake, the forest, the castle at his back with its centuries of accumulated magic and history, and felt also, pressing at the edges of awareness, the dark turned attention that he'd sensed since last night, closer now, adjusting to this new development. Whatever was watching him from the dark had just witnessed the declaration. Had felt the court's response. It didn't change anything about the dark thing's intent, Harry suspected. If anything, it complicated it in ways that made it more dangerous, not less. But complicated and dangerous was fine. Complicated and dangerous was, historically, Harry's natural habitat. He turned back to his friends. Let's go inside. It's freezing. Ron immediately started walking, visibly grateful for something as ordinary as being cold. Hermione fell into step with Harry, and after a moment said, quietly, they answered. Yes. That means, Harry, that means whatever legal standing Xenophilius described, it's real. Harry nodded. I know. Hermione was quiet for 3 steps. Then, you're going to be fine at this, aren't you? The political side. The court side. All of it. I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. But I'm going to find out. Luna walked beside him, not quite touching but close enough that the warmth between them was present and specific, a small orbit they both moved in without discussing it. The castle loomed ahead, golden-windowed and solid, full of the sleeping ordinary world. It looked, Harry thought, very slightly smaller than it had yesterday. Not diminished. Just, properly sized, now that he could see the shape of everything beyond it. Chapter 3, Courts and Consequences. She arrived on a Wednesday. Nobody saw her come through the gates. Nobody saw her on the road, nobody felt her cross the wards, which was, in itself, a statement, because Hogwarts's perimeter wards were not casual magic. They were layered and old and had stopped things that would make a seasoned Auror reconsider their career choices. Whatever Seraphine was, she wasn't stopped by them. She walked through them the way sunlight walks through glass, not breaking anything, not asking permission, simply continuing. Harry felt her arrive. He was in the middle of charms, 3 rows from the front, and his head came up like an animal catching a scent. Not threat, not exactly. Something older than threat, something that carried weight the way a very old name carries weight. A presence that the Fae in his blood recognized on frequencies the human part of him didn't have words for yet. He set down his wand. Flitwick was mid-demonstration, oblivious. I have to go, Harry said. Flitwick turned. Mr. Potter, we're in the middle of, I know. I'm sorry. Harry was already standing, already moving, not rude but absolutely definite, the tone of someone who has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion that isn't negotiable. He heard Ron say something behind him, heard Flitwick's surprised flutter, and then he was in the corridor and moving toward the entrance hall, following something he could feel the way you follow the warmth of a fire in a cold room. She was standing in the entrance hall when he got there. She was tall, not preternaturally so, but tall in the way that made you recalibrate the space around her, like she occupied slightly more of it than her physical dimensions accounted for. Her hair was the color of deep water, dark with a blue-black shift to it, worn loose to her shoulders. Her eyes were amber, the exact amber of the light in the lake, which Harry clocked immediately as deliberate. She was wearing something that looked like dark traveling clothes but moved wrong, like they were cloth and also something else. She was the most beautiful person Harry had ever seen, and he was aware of this the way you're aware of a well-made weapon, functionally, without being disarmed by it. She was looking at him with an expression that was approximately 1 inch shy of boredom and contained within that inch, if you looked carefully, something that was very much not boredom. You're smaller than I expected, she said. Her accent had no geography to it. Her voice carried the same resonance as the declaration had at the lake, not loud but present in a way that seemed to occupy the room. You're later than you should be, Harry said, which surprised him slightly as he said it. But it felt right, not rude, not posturing, just accurate in a way that the Fae part of him seemed to understand. Her expression moved almost imperceptibly. One corner of her mouth adjusted by roughly 2 degrees. 500 years late, technically, she said. Though I was going to be diplomatic about that. Harry Potter, Harry said. I know who you are. She looked him over with the directness of someone taking inventory, not unkindly but without pretense of social softening. Seraphine. Emissary of the Unseelie adjacent Third Court, seconded to the sovereign seat for the purpose of this matter. A pause. You can call me Seraphine. The full title takes 4 minutes and we have things to do. What things? Many things. She glanced around the entrance hall with the expression of someone visiting a place that is historically significant but architecturally disappointing. First, somewhere to talk that isn't a lobby. Harry looked at her for a moment. He was aware that he was standing in his school, in his uniform, with ink on his fingers from charms, facing someone who was older than most recorded history and had just walked through Hogwarts's wards without asking. He was also aware that she was watching him calibrate all of this and that she was measuring something in how he did it. He didn't try to perform authority. He just had it. Follow me, he said, and turned toward the corridor that led to the room of requirement. He heard her steps behind him, unhurried, even. Matching his pace. The room of requirement opened for him into something he hadn't consciously asked for but which the room had apparently extrapolated from his needs, a space that was old stone and natural light, no school furniture, more like a space between a grove and a library. There was a table, 2 chairs, and on the table, already present, the 3 books Xenophilius had given him. Seraphine looked at the room with what might have been the faintest trace of approval. Better, she said, and sat down without ceremony. Harry sat across from her. The declaration at the lake was 2 days ago, he said. That's fast. The declaration was 2 days ago. The awakening was 4 days ago. She laced her fingers on the table. Her hands were elegant and unhurried and Harry noticed 3 rings on them that weren't rings, they were something else, something that carried the same multidirectional resonance as Xenophilius's 7-pointed compass. The courts felt the binding come off the moment it happened. We've been aware of you since your birth, Mr. Potter. We've been waiting, with varying degrees of patience, for the suppression to end. Were you going to do anything about it? We did not have legal standing to intervene directly in a human binding on a Fey bloodline member who had not yet made a declaration. She said it precisely, without particular heat, but there was something underneath it that was not precisely neutral. Court law is rigid on this point. Until you formally acknowledge your heritage and request recognition, we are restricted to observation. You've been watching me for 15 years, Harry said. Yes. And you couldn't do anything about Dumbledore's binding? No. Harry looked at her steadily. That must have been frustrating. Something genuinely moved in those amber eyes. Spectacularly, she said, and for a moment she wasn't performing emissary neutrality and was instead a person who had watched something be wrong for a very long time. You have no idea, actually, you might have some idea, what it is to watch a Fey prince bound and filed away like a piece of inconvenient paperwork and be unable to act on it. Now I've made the declaration, Harry said. What happens next? Now, Seraphine said, settling back into her precise emissary composure, we have several concurrent matters. First, formal recognition. The courts need to record your standing and your lineage claim. This is procedural but necessary. It establishes you as a legal sovereign entity under Fey court law, which has implications for every other authority currently claiming jurisdiction over you. The Ministry, Harry said. The Ministry, Hogwarts, the Order of the Phoenix, and anyone else operating under the assumption that you are a human minor subject to their oversight. She looked at him without expression. You are not. You are heir to the eternal line. Under court law, you have been legally an adult sovereign since the day you were born. The binding delayed the manifestation, but it could not alter the hereditary fact. Harry let that settle. The Ministry's file on him, underage magic restrictions, the hearing that had nearly cost him his place at Hogwarts, every piece of leveraged authority Umbridge wielded, all of it predicated on a classification that was factually wrong. Second, he asked. Your training. You have 60.3% Fey blood that has been building behind a dam for 15 years. The binding is gone but the power is still, unorganized. Unmapped. You need to learn what you have before something happens that you didn't intend. She paused. Several things have already happened that you didn't intend, I assume. Harry thought of the night his scar had tingled and every object in his dormitory had rearranged itself by 4 inches. Of the morning he'd walked into the great hall and all the candles had flared double height simultaneously and then settled. Of the way Neville's teacup had, without explanation, repaired itself when Harry brushed past it with an absent thought of "that's a shame." A few things, he admitted. Yes. We will address that. She opened one hand, palm up, and on it rested a small object that Harry hadn't seen her reach for, a coin, old, the face script on its face, a deep amber stone set at its center. "Third matter, the Dark Lord." "I know," Harry said. "He knows the binding is gone. I could feel him orient toward me that night. He sent scouts within 18 hours. Discreet. They were turned back by the court's peripheral protections. We maintain a light watch on recognized bloodline members, even before formal declaration. They were not harmed." She set the coin on the table. "What concerns the court is not his immediate interest. It's his long-term strategy. Tell me." Voldemort's understanding of Fey heritage is incomplete but not absent. He is aware that an immortal bloodline member cannot be killed by conventional means once their power is fully manifest. She said it straightforwardly, watching his face. He is aware that attempting to simply destroy you will, past a certain threshold of awakening, become impossible. He is therefore not currently planning to destroy you. Harry waited. "He is planning to bind you," Seraphine said. "Not the way Dumbledore did, subtly, suppressively. A full Fey binding, the kind that doesn't muffle power but redirects it. Turns it into a weapon that serves the binder rather than the bound." She looked at him directly. "He has been researching this method for 18 months. He began the moment he returned to a body. He suspected what you were before the binding came off, your defeat of him as an infant, your survival of the killing curse. Neither of these things fit human parameters. He has been operating on the theory of Fey blood since your first year." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about Voldemort, not as a monster, not as a symbol, but as the brilliant, broken, desperate thing he actually was. A man who had carved his soul into pieces to avoid death, who had spent decades engineering his own immortality. Learning that the child who defeated him was carrying an immortal bloodline that dwarfed anything he'd managed to manufacture must have been, Harry imagined, genuinely infuriating. "He wants to use me," Harry said. "He wants to own you," Seraphine corrected. "There's a distinction. Using implies a temporary arrangement. What he's researching is a permanent binding, the kind that would make you, functionally, an extension of his will. An immortal Fey prince under absolute compulsion would be," she paused for the first time, searching for scale. "There is no equivalent in recorded history. No army, no artifact, no accumulated power comes close." "That's not going to happen," Harry said. "No," she agreed, and there was something in the way she said it, an absolute, settled certainty that matched his own. "Which is why the third matter is actually the most urgent, despite being last on my list." She turned the coin over. "Your training begins today." "Today," Harry said. "You have unorganized power, an enemy actively researching how to capture it, a political situation that is about to become extremely complicated when the Ministry learns what you are, and approximately," she tilted her head, assessing, 4 to 6 weeks before your power reaches a threshold where the binding Voldemort is researching becomes impossible to cast. Past that threshold, you are beyond his reach permanently." She looked at him. "So yes. Today." Harry picked up the coin. The amber stone pulsed once against his palm, warm and distinct. "What does this do?" "It's a focus point. Not a crutch, you won't always need it. But in the early stages of Fey training, having something physical to orient around is useful. It anchors your intent before your will is trained enough to anchor itself." She stood, and the room responded to her movement, the light shifting slightly, the old stone quality of the air adjusting. "We'll start with what you can already feel. You told the human scholar, Love Good, that you could sense the garden and the lake. Show me. Harry stood. He extended his awareness outward, not the light in his skin, not the fey warmth, but the sensory field that had opened up since the binding came off. He felt the castle in its entirety in an instant, 347 people in the building, the density of centuries-old magic in the walls, the 7 ward lines that ran through the structure like bones, the kitchen below full of warmth and chopping sounds, the forest at the edges pressing its huge slow life against the perimeter, the lake with its deep amber seam. Stop, Seraphine said. Too wide. You went from the room to the entire castle in one breath. That's like going from walking to sprinting without the middle stages. She tilted her head. Though the range is significant. How far did you get before I stopped you? The lake. From the 7th floor. Yes. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has expected a lot and is still being surprised. Fine. We'll adjust the curriculum. She walked to the center of the room. The first thing you need to understand about Fey power is that it isn't categorized the way human magic is. Your people divided, charms, transfiguration, defense, potions. Separate disciplines, separate wand movements, separate incantations. This is efficient for managing limited power. But it is a filing system designed for a small library. You are not a small library. She spread her hands. Fey power is unified. It is intent made manifest through will, shaped by clarity and depth of purpose. The division into types is a human framework your blood does not share. She looked at him. Every wizard at Hogwarts has been training you to use your power wrong. They've been training me to use the human 40%, Harry said. Exactly. The Fey 60 has been lying underneath it, pressing against the framework, occasionally blowing out of the margins. She pointed at the space between them. You've had accidental manifestations. Tell me one. Harry thought. The night after the binding came off, every candle in the great hall lit double height when I walked in. Emotional state. Confident. Clear. Glad to be back. You were broadcasting, Seraphine said. Your emotional state carried physical resonance. The fire responded to your presence. You weren't directing it, it was spillage. She paused. Direct it now. One of those candles. She gestured and a candle appeared on the table, unlit. Not a spell. Not an incantation. Intent only. Harry looked at the candle. He thought about light, not the word, not the wand movement, not the incendio he'd used 100 times. He thought about warmth happening at that specific point, about the wick catching and holding, about the specific quality of candlelight as distinct from firelight or sunlight. The Fey warmth in his chest moved like water being poured in a specific direction. The candle lit. Cleanly, precisely, exactly the right size flame. Good, Seraphine said. Again. But this time, she blew it out and took 3 steps back, putting herself roughly 6 feet from the candle. Light it from here. Don't move toward it. Don't extend your hand. Sit in your own center and reach. Harry sat in his own center, which he was learning was less metaphorical than it sounded, it was an actual practice, a specific way of inhabiting himself, and reached for the candle. Not physically. Intentionally. The candle lit. It took 3 seconds, which Seraphine's expression suggested was slower than she'd expected, but it lit cleanly and held. Passable, she said. Thanks, Harry said drily. Don't be satisfied. That's a first-year Fey child's exercise. She turned away, walking the room, thinking. Your real problem isn't power generation. You have more of that than I've seen in a living Fey in 2 centuries. Your problem is refinement. You are, she searched for it, a river that's never had banks. All force, no channel. She turned back. We build the banks. They worked for 3 hours. By the end of it, Harry could light, extinguish, move, shape and feel the resonance of every object in the room. He could hold a static field around himself that made the air between him and any external force feel like it had solidity, not quite a shield, not quite a wall, something more fundamental. He could feel a person's emotional state through the quality of their presence without reading their thoughts. Seraphine's was, he discovered, a very carefully maintained neutrality over something that was older and much less neutral, the emotional equivalent of a still surface over deep current. He mentioned this and she looked at him sharply. "Don't read emissaries without invitation," she said. "I didn't try to. It was just there. Your sensitivity is," she paused. "We'll add shielding to the curriculum. Not to block, but to give you the choice of whether to receive." She looked at him with that measuring quality she'd had since the entrance hall. The eternal line hasn't produced a full expression in 5 centuries. There's no comparison template. You understand that I'm building this as we go. I figured, Harry said. He wasn't bothered by it. There was something, actually, that he found clarifying about being in entirely new territory, no map, no precedent, no senior who'd done it before. Just him and what he was and the work of understanding it. "You're not anxious about that," she said. It was almost a question. No. Most people would be. "I spent 15 years living in a cupboard and then being the target of a Dark Lord," Harry said. "Ambiguity isn't my weak point." She looked at him for a moment, and then the 2-degree adjustment happened at the corner of her mouth again, and Harry got the impression that Seraphine's version of a smile was precisely calibrated not to exceed whatever professional diplomatic requirements she was operating under. "No," she agreed. "I suppose it isn't." The news broke in 3 places simultaneously. The first was the Prophet, which ran it on Thursday, the morning after Seraphine's arrival, under a headline that was both alarmist and almost entirely inaccurate. "Potter blood test results raise questions. I asked the boy who lived something else entirely." Xenophilius had not given the story to the Prophet. Someone in the ministry had, which meant the ministry's information channels had already been running, which meant someone had been monitoring the Lovegood house. Harry read the article over breakfast with the calm attention of someone reading a weather report for a place they weren't planning to visit. It got several things wrong, speculated wildly about things it got half right, and ended with 3 paragraphs from ministry officials expressing measured concern about Harry's undefined classification. Hermione read it across the table with her jaw set and her eyes very focused. Ron read it and said something about the Prophet that was anatomically creative and technically impossible. The second place was Umbridge's office, where Harry was summoned at 9 that morning. He went without being collected. He was there before the pink-robed professor arrived, and sat in one of the kitten-decorated chairs and waited. Umbridge came in, looked at him already seated, and spent half a second doing a recalibration that reminded Harry of Dumbledore's recalibration in miniature, registering that Harry was not performing the appropriate degree of anxiety. She sat behind her desk with the deliberate composure of someone assuming authority. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I expect you've seen this morning's Prophet." "Yes. I'm sure you understand my concern about, you don't have authority over this," Harry said pleasantly. "Whatever you're about to say, suspension, investigation, classification hearing, the ministry doesn't have jurisdiction over a recognized Fey bloodline member. That's a matter of record going back about 800 years. You can check." Umbridge looked at him. Her eyes had the quality they got when she encountered something outside her prepared script, a flat, recalculating blankness. "The ministry's authority extends to all magical beings in Britain. Fey courts predate the British ministry by approximately 4,000 years, Harry said. "I don't say that to be difficult. It's just the relevant legal context. You are a student at this school, I'm enrolled here. I'm here by choice." He met her gaze without any hostility, just total clarity. "Hogwarts is a place I value. I'd prefer to stay." He let that word, prefer, sit between them and understood, by the way her expression adjusted, that she understood it too. He wasn't threatening. He was informing. He left her office and felt her stare on his back and did not turn around. The third place the news broke was in the Slytherin common room, which Harry knew about not through any direct intelligence but through Draco Malfoy appearing at lunch with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and was working significantly harder at it than usual. He dropped the prophet on Harry's section of the Gryffindor table, a remarkable act of presumption even by Malfoy's standards, and said, 60%, Potter. Dad says if it's true, you're not even properly human. Harry looked up at him. Your dad's right, he said. I'm not. That a problem for you? Malfoy had clearly prepared for defensiveness, possibly for anger, certainly for some variety of flustered denial. He had not prepared for cheerful agreement. He stood there for a moment with the wrong expression assembled and no good place to put it. It means you're heir to an immortal Fey court, Harry said. Legal sovereign under law 4,000 years older than anything the Ministry operates on. He tilted his head. Actually, Draco, given how invested your family is in bloodline politics, you should probably be more excited about this than anyone. Malfoy's mouth opened, closed. He picked up the prophet, looked like he had about 11 things to say, discarded all of them, and walked away. Crabbe and Goyle trailed him with the confused expressions of people who had been ready for a fight and were now unclear where the fight had gone. Ron watched them leave. That was beautiful, he said. Don't, Hermione said, but she was fighting a smile. The formal recognition happened on Friday evening, and it was not what Harry had imagined. He'd imagined something ceremonial, robes, specific locations, formal language read from a scroll. What actually happened was that Seraphine led him to the edge of the forest, to a specific point between two oak trees that were old enough to have predated the castle itself, and said, "Stand here. Don't speak. Don't do anything." Harry stood. He didn't speak. He did nothing. The air between the oaks changed. Not dramatically, not a crack of thunder or a rush of wind. It changed the way the air changes when you step from outside into a very old building, the pressure and quality of it shifting into something denser and more layered. And from that changed air, something emerged, not in a way he could describe with physical language, more like a consciousness that stepped across a threshold he couldn't see, bringing with it the quality of age and depth and absolute attention. He felt it the way he'd felt Seraphine's arrival, but magnified enormously, the presence of something that made Seraphine seem newly minted by comparison. The eternal air, something communicated. Not in words. In something below words, in the base language of recognition between things of the same blood. Confirmed. Witnessed. Recorded. Harry felt something settle in him, a finality, a formal quality. Like a door closing firmly on something that had been left ajar for 500 years. The line holds, the presence continued. Go well. And then it withdrew, and the air between the oaks was just air, cold and smelling of earth and bark, and Seraphine was standing beside him with her arms folded and her expression doing that barely there adjustment. That's it. Harry said. The courts don't really do pomp, she said. That's a human preference. A pause. What you just experienced was the sovereign seat acknowledging you in person. That has not happened for 500 years. The last time was, the original union. Yes. She looked at him. You are now, under every framework of law that predates civilization as your kind understands it, formally and permanently recognized. She paused. How do you feel? Harry thought about it. The warmth in his chest was brighter, settled, the amber of the lake in his blood sitting more solidly than it had before. He felt, complete, in a way he didn't have a prior reference for, like a sentence that had been missing its last word and had just found it. Like it should always have been this, he said. Seraphine nodded once. Then she looked north, toward something Harry couldn't see, and the careful neutrality of her face sharpened briefly into something alert. We have a complication. He felt it a moment after she spoke, the dark pressure from the north, closer than it had been last night, and this time accompanied by something specific. Not one dark presence. Several. Moving with purpose. How many? Harry asked. 7. Death Eaters, not the primary. He's not coming himself, not yet. He sent assessors. Her voice was completely steady. They'll be at the edge of Hogwarts's wards within the hour. They can't breach them. The wards here are old enough to have Fey elements baked in, and the recognition tonight will have strengthened them. She paused. But their presence on the perimeter will be felt. Dumbledore will respond. The Order will be notified. Harry looked toward the forest, feeling the 7 dark presences moving through the dark countryside like blunt instruments. He felt no fear of them. He felt interested, again, and something sharper alongside it. A readiness. I want to meet them at the perimeter, he said. Seraphine turned to look at him. They're not a threat to the castle. I know. But I want them to see me. He met her gaze. Not because I want a fight. Because Voldemort sent them to assess what's here. I want them to take an accurate report back. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. You want him to know what he's facing. I want him to know that whatever he's planning, the binding, the acquisition strategy, I know about it, and I'm awake, and I'm not the Harry Potter from whatever intelligence file he's been operating from. He paused. A message. Sent efficiently. Seraphine considered him. Most people, when told that the most dangerous Dark Lord in a century is sending scouts to assess them, take a step backward. I know. You're taking a step forward. Yes. The 2-degree adjustment at the corner of her mouth. I'll come with you, she said. Not to interfere. But, and here's something shifted in her voice that wasn't quite warmth but was in the same family as warmth, you're not there yet, Prince. 4 days out of a binding isn't sufficient foundation for facing Death Eaters alone. Harry nodded. He wasn't offended by the caveat, it was accurate. Tell me what you'll do if it goes wrong. It won't go wrong. She started walking toward the perimeter. But if it does, I'll be deeply annoyed and somewhat less restricted in my response than diplomatic protocol strictly allows. Harry walked beside her through the dark, the forest pressing its enormous slow life against them on one side, the castle throwing its warm gold light across the ground on the other. He could feel the 7 presences like cold points of light moving in a wide arc around the north perimeter, organized, careful, professional. He could also feel, at his back, the sharp new warmth of the formal recognition settled in his blood, the court's acknowledgement sitting in him like a second heartbeat. He thought about Voldemort planning for 18 months to bind an immortal Fey prince. He thought about the elegant, terrible intelligence of that plan, acknowledge what your enemy is, study the mechanics of it, prepare accordingly. He respected the quality of the thinking even while he intended to dismantle it completely. He reached the perimeter ward as the 7 presences reached the other side of it. The ward was a cold line in the air between them, not visible but palpable, a firm and absolute boundary. Harry stood at it and felt the Death Eaters on the other side feel him. There was a moment of adjustment, he could feel it, their awareness shifting as they registered what was standing at the ward. Not the frightened teenager from the intelligence files. Something that read entirely differently. Something that stood inside its own power the way a mountain stands inside itself. He looked through the dark toward where they were and he did one simple, specific thing, he let himself be fully felt. Not aggressively, not a show of force. Just completely present, completely himself, the entire 60.3% of him, the Fey warmth and the wizard power and the amber-deep immortal blood of the oldest court. He let that presence carry across the ward the way heat carries across a room, steady and total. He heard, at the edge of his range, the sound of 7 people deciding, simultaneously, that their instructions had been adequately fulfilled and departure was now appropriate. He stood at the ward until the cold points were gone, receding north at speed. Then he turned back toward the castle. Seraphine was watching him with an expression that had moved past the 2-degree adjustment into something he hadn't seen from her yet. Something more open. Not quite surprised, she wasn't the sort of person surprise happened to easily, but something in the vicinity of impressed, which he suspected she would not be saying aloud. "They're going back to him," Harry said. "Yes. What will they tell him?" "The truth," Seraphine said. "That what's at Hogwarts is not what he was planning for." She paused. "That the binding strategy needs to be reconsidered." "Good," Harry said. He looked up at the castle, the lit windows, the towers, the old stone full of centuries. "He'll adapt. He's intelligent and he doesn't give up." He thought about it, turning it over. What happens when he realizes the binding is impossible past a certain threshold? He may try to accelerate. "Act before you're fully awake." She said it evenly. "We should assume he will." "How long do we have?" 3 weeks. Possibly 4. She walked beside him back toward the entrance. "Which is why the training pace needs to accelerate as well." She glanced at him sideways. "Sleep tonight. Tomorrow we start the parts that are harder." Harry thought about what could be harder than lighting a candle with his mind and sending 7 Death Eaters home with a look. "How much harder?" "Considerably," she said. "Tonight was instinct. What comes next is craft." He nodded. The castle door opened ahead of him without being touched. He hadn't meant to do it, but it didn't surprise him. Behind him, very faintly, Seraphine made a sound that was, conceivably, a laugh. Chapter 4, The Language of War. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Harry had never experienced before, not the grinding, institutional rhythm of school terms, not the anxious holding pattern rhythm of summers at the Dursleys, but something faster and more purposeful, days that were full in every hour without being exhausting, the way a long run feels different from a slog. Mornings were Seraphine. They used the room of requirement, which had apparently decided it liked them and had stopped requiring him to walk past the entrance 3 times, simply opening when Harry was in the corridor. The sessions were demanding in ways that had no physical equivalent. It wasn't tired muscles or aching bones, it was the specific fatigue of a mind that had been working at full capacity for hours, mapping new territory, learning to operate systems that had no instruction manual. He was learning the craft of his power the way a musician learns an instrument, scales first, then progressions, then something that started to resemble music. By the end of the 2nd week he could hold a full sensory field across Hogwarts's entire grounds without strain. He could move objects with the precision of a surgeon, not the blunt momentum of a Wingardium Leviosa but actual movement, directed with the same quality of attention a hand uses. He could communicate in the nonverbal Fey language, not to anyone in particular, but he was developing the capacity, learning to send and receive on frequencies the human part of him had no prior architecture for. The 3rd week Seraphine moved to something she called resonance work, which Harry privately called the part where things occasionally exploded. It was the practice of extending his presence, not his senses, not his power, but him, the specific frequency of what he was, outward in controlled waves. The first time he did it successfully, every window in the room of requirement cracked along the edges, not shattering but fracturing, the air in the room singing at a frequency slightly outside hearing. Seraphine had looked at the cracked windows and then at Harry and said, "Again. Controlled this time." He'd done it again. Controlled. She rarely praised him directly. She indicated progress by raising the difficulty, which he'd come to understand was, for Seraphine, approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. Afternoons were his. He used them for the Fey books, for conversations with Hermione who was building the most comprehensive private archive of Fey court law in the history of the British wizarding world, for long walks to the lake where the amber warmth beneath the water pulsed in greeting and he sat on the rocks and felt the enormous slow patience of something ancient being glad he existed. Luna came to the lake sometimes and sat beside him without demanding conversation, which was its own kind of companionship. They talked when something needed saying and were quiet when it didn't, and the space between them had been slowly changing in the way a season changes, not dramatically, just steadily, accumulating warmth in small increments, each one unremarkable and all of them together considerable. Harry wasn't in a hurry to name it. Whatever it was genuine, and genuine things didn't need to be rushed. Ron had taken it upon himself to become Harry's unofficial intelligence operation, using a network of Gryffindor social connections and one surprisingly useful Hufflepuff to keep tabs on Umbridge, Ministry communications filtered through the school, and Slytherin common room sentiment. He delivered daily briefings with the efficiency of someone who had discovered he was good at something and was quietly delighted about it. Malfoy, apparently, had written to his father 3 times in 1 week. The Ministry had filed 2 separate requests for Harry's voluntary cooperation in classification review, both of which Harry had returned unopened. Dumbledore had requested a meeting. Harry had sent back a note that said "I'll let you know when I'm ready" and left it there. Dumbledore had, after a notable pause, replied, "Of course." Nothing else. It was, Harry thought, the most honest communication they'd had. The attack came on a Tuesday, which felt, in retrospect, exactly like the kind of deliberate misdirection Voldemort would enjoy. Tuesdays were ordinary. Tuesdays were double herbology and an evening Quidditch practice and the particular comfort of a day that has no surprises planned for it. Harry felt them at 7 in the morning. He was in the great hall with his porridge half finished when the pressure arrived, not the cold, blunt pressure of scouts, not the careful distant attention he'd been monitoring from the north. This was organized and multiple, and it came from 3 directions simultaneously. South, east, and directly above. The wards absorbed it, pushed back, held, but the scale was different from the scouts 3 weeks ago. Different quality, different intent. He set down his spoon. Seraphine appeared at the entrance to the great hall 3 seconds later. She moved without hurry and with complete direction, which meant she'd been monitoring and was already ahead of him. She met his eyes from across the room and gave him one precise nod. Harry stood. Ron. Hermione. They were already looking at him. They'd learned, in the weeks since the binding came off, to read the slight changes in his quality of attention the way you learn to read weather in a landscape you know well. Hermione was reaching for her wand before he said their names. Ron had already pushed his bench back. "What is it?" Hermione said. "Three-sided approach. The wards are holding but they're organized." Harry was already moving toward the door, Seraphine meeting him halfway. "This isn't scouts." "No," Seraphine said, falling into step beside him. 32 confirmed. "Possibly more, I can't distinguish yet. He's using a dampening technique on the outer group." She glanced at him. "He's not coming personally." "He's testing," Harry said. "He's accelerating." She said it without alarm, but with the precision of someone who has been monitoring a timeline and has just had a data point confirmed. "He's concluded the binding strategy isn't viable. This is the next option." Harry stopped walking. They were in the main corridor, halfway between the great hall and the entrance. He stood still for 3 seconds and felt the attack structure, the south group, largest, pressing directly against the main wards with the brute sustained pressure of a battering ram, the east group, smaller and more precise, targeting the ward line seams, the group above, airborne, 3 or 4, maintaining an angle that would become a dive if the wards gave way anywhere. He felt the wards hold. He also felt the specific point of stress on the eastern ward line. It was old there, older than the rest, one of the pre-Hogwarts Fey elements that had been built over and integrated but not reinforced in centuries. The Death Eaters on the east had found it. They were working at it like locksmiths, patiently and with knowledge that suggested significant research. Harry felt where they were working and felt what they were doing and understood, in the Fey part of him, exactly what would happen if that ward seam failed. He also felt something else. Something that Seraphine apparently felt a half-second later, because she said, very quietly, "Harry." The ward seam was Fey-built. And it had recognized his blood. It was pulling at him the way the lake pulled at him, the way the oaks at the recognition ceremony had recognized him, not a cry for help but a fact, a connection, the simple physics of like calling to like. He could reinforce it. Not with a spell, not with wand work, with himself. "The eastern ward seam," he said. "I know," Seraphine said. "Which is exactly what I'm worried about. It's Fey-built. It'll hold if I anchor it. It will also make your position extremely visible to everyone pressing on it. She looked at him with the amber eyes that had been teaching him for 3 weeks, and for the first time he saw in them something that wasn't neutrality or measurement or professional assessment. Something older and more personal. 32 Death Eaters will feel you the moment you connect to that ward. Good, Harry said. I want them to. Ron made a sound. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Harry looked at Seraphine. You said 3 weeks ago that I wanted him to know what he's facing. Nothing's changed about that. He's chosen to accelerate, fine. We accelerate too. He held her gaze. What's your read on the Eastern group specifically? She was quiet for exactly 1 second, Seraphine's version of a long pause. 6. 3 are senior. The seam work they're doing is precise enough that at least one of them has Fey lineage research experience. This was planned, not improvised. So he sent his best on the east because that's the weak point and he knew it. Yes. And if they breach it, the other 26 come through the south while the airborne group takes the towers. He felt the structure of it, the clean tactical intelligence of it. Voldemort, he'd thought before, was a brilliant man working from fear, and fear made brilliant men take risks a calm mind wouldn't. This attack was both brilliant and fear-driven simultaneously, the acceleration of a timeline because waiting had become more dangerous than acting. He's not trying to take the castle, Harry said. No, Seraphine agreed. He's trying to extract you from it. Which means if we just hold the wards, the attack loses its objective and they withdraw. Harry considered. Or you go out, Seraphine said, and there was something in her voice that was both disapproving and entirely resigned to the outcome she was describing. Or I go out, Harry said. Meet them at the East Ward seam. Anchor it from outside. And make very clear, in person and without ambiguity, that this approach is over. That's 3 to 1, Ron said. No, 6 to 1 if you're on the seam. I know. Harry, Hermione said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was about to make an argument she already knew she was going to lose. 3 weeks of training is not 3 weeks of intensive Fey-level training after 15 years of accumulated power behind a dam. He looked at her directly. Hermione. You've been watching the training sessions. I know what you can do in a controlled room with Seraphine, and in a controlled room with Seraphine I held a resonance wave that cracked every window without breaking them, on purpose, at will. He met her eyes. I'm not going because I want to fight. I'm going because the alternative is letting 32 people hammer at this school for an hour until something gives, and then people get hurt. Students get hurt. He paused. That's not happening. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she let out a breath that had a lot of argument in it that she was choosing not to voice. We're coming, she said. Not to the seam, to the south ward line. If the south group moves while you're engaged on the east, we respond. Harry looked at her. Then at Ron. Ron had his wand out, his jaw set, his expression entirely settled. Obviously, he said. Seraphine, Harry said. I'll be on the east with you, she said, and her voice had the tone he'd come to recognize as Seraphine who has stopped being an emissary and become something older. Not to interfere. But this time, she glanced at him sideways, I'm not just watching. They came out of the castle through a side passage that led out near the eastern grounds, where the old Fey ward seam ran diagonally through the hill at the edge of the forest, marked by a line of stones that were older than the castle's foundation. The morning was grey and cold, the grounds empty of students, the sky carrying the particular flat quality of a day that has decided to be serious. Harry felt the 6 on the eastern side the moment he stepped outside, felt them push back against his presence with the startled quality of people who have been working quietly and have just heard a door open. He didn't wait for them to reorient. He walked to the ward seam and put his hand on the nearest stone. The seam recognized him instantly. A rush of amber warmed through the stone into his palm, an acknowledgement that moved up his arm and settled in his chest alongside the quartz recognition warmth. He felt the entire length of the ward seam light up, not just the stressed section but the whole of it, every Fey element in it waking up the way embers wake up when oxygen reaches them. The seam stopped weakening. It began reinforcing itself, the ward building from Harry's blood outward through the old Fey architecture, filling the gaps the Death Eaters had been patient making. From the other side of the ward, he felt 6 people feel this happen. He looked across the ward line into the grey morning and saw them, 60 yards out, spread in a loose semicircle, 6 robed figures with their masks up. He felt their individual qualities, 3 who were cold and professional, 3 who carried the specific heat of people who have convinced themselves that certainty is the same as righteousness. He felt the one who knew the Fey research, because that person's presence had a particular analytical texture that he recognized from Hermione, except oriented toward destruction rather than understanding. None of them moved. They were recalibrating. Harry stepped through the ward. Not past it, not a breach, the seam opened for him the way a door opens for a key, and he stepped onto the grass on the outside and stood in the grey morning between the castle and 6 Death Eaters and felt the ward close neatly behind him. The 6 went very still. He could feel them feeling him, all of him, the full presence he'd learned to project without weaponizing, the 60.3% of Fey blood and the Fey court recognition and the 3 weeks of work and the 15 years of accumulated power. He felt them revise their understanding of what they'd been sent to deal with, rapidly and not comfortably. "You've been working on this seam for 40 minutes, Harry said. His voice was conversational, no theatrics. Careful work, proper research, good methodology. Whoever planned the Eastern approach understood what they were looking at. He looked at them steadily. Tell him it won't work. Not the seam, not anything in Hogwarts's ward structure. These wards have Fey foundations. I'm part of those foundations now." Nobody spoke. He didn't expect them to. "The binding strategy is gone," Harry continued. "I know he knows that, that's why you're here. What I want him to understand is what comes next, because I think he may be operating from an incomplete model." He paused. "I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to wait for him to come to me on his terms. I'm 15 years awake and 4 weeks fully awake, and in another 3 weeks I'm going to be something that doesn't have a precedent in his research files." He looked directly at the one who felt like the researcher. "You know that. Tell him I said so." One of the professional cold ones moved. Not an attack, a reach, a hand raising, the beginning of a binding gesture. The gesture stopped. Not because Harry waved it away, not because Seraphine intervened, because the Fey warmth in Harry's blood met the binding energy at its source, at the space between the Death Eater's intent and its manifestation, and refused it. Not forcefully, not with a countercurse or a shield. He simply declined to be affected by it, the way a mountain declines to be affected by someone shouting at it. The binding energy hit the ambient field of his presence and dissipated. The Death Eater lowered their hands slowly. "Right," Harry said. "So we've established that." He felt the South Ward group shift, heard, at the edge of his range, something that suggested the South had registered the silence from the East and was recalibrating. He felt Ron and Hermione at the South Ward line, steady and ready, Ron's particular specific brand of steady courage, a warmth he could feel from 100 yards. He felt Seraphine a step behind him, the ancient deep current presence of her, and she was not doing anything except being present, and her presence was not small. One of the 3 who carried the certainty heat moved forward 2 steps. Harry felt the intent before the motion, anger, the complicated kind that comes from devotion to a cause and frustration at its outcomes. He felt the killing curse forming. Not the wand movement, not the words, the intent, which was what actually powered it. He felt it form and he stepped sideways. Not a dodge, not the quick frightened lateral move he'd learned in 6 years of being shot at. A deliberate step, easy and unhurried, the way you step around a puddle. The curse went past him and hit an oak at the forest's edge, and the tree died quietly, its leaves going brown all at once. Harry looked at the tree, then back at the Death Eater who'd cast it. He felt something in his chest that was not anger but was adjacent to it, a clear-eyed, specific response to someone destroying something living for no reason except to try to destroy him. He reached into the oak. The fey warmth in his blood moved along a line between him and the dead tree, and he felt the tree's root system below the frost line, still alive, and he gave it something, some clear specific warmth, and the leaves came back. Not exactly as they were, the new growth was a slightly different green, younger, more vivid, but it was life returning where death had been, and it happened in roughly 8 seconds. The 6 Death Eaters looked at the tree. Harry looked at them. He should know that too, he said quietly. The Southern Ward group broke first. Harry felt them before he heard the sound of their departure, the pressure simply lifting, 26 presences choosing the same direction in quick succession. The airborne group above followed moments later. The Eastern 6 held the longest, nearly 2 full minutes of absolute stillness, 6 people standing in the grey morning recalculating something fundamental, and then they too turned and moved into the tree line and were gone. Harry stood in the empty morning for a moment. The ward seam hummed behind him, fully reinforced, the fey elements in it bright and settled. The oak at the forest's edge stood with its new green leaves, alive and strange. The grounds were empty and cold and quiet. He turned back to the ward, stepped through, and walked back toward the castle. Seraphine fell into step beside him. She was quiet for a moment, her real quiet, the one that wasn't diplomatic but personal. "The tree," she said. "It was just alive," Harry said. "Someone killed it for nothing. I wasn't going to leave it that way." She was quiet for another few steps. "That's a fey response." "Is it?" "The immortal courts, the old ones, they don't draw a sharp line between a person and a tree and a stone the way humans do. Life is life. What's alive is kin." She looked at him sideways. "Most wizards wouldn't have thought about the tree." "I noticed it," Harry said. That felt like enough. Inside the castle, Ron and Hermione were coming in from the south entrance, flushed from the cold, Hermione's hair wilder than usual from the wind. Ron looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has been standing at a ward line ready to do something and has experienced the specific anticlimax of not having to. "They just left," Ron said. "The south group. Just turned and went." "What happened on the east?" "I talked to them," Harry said. Ron stared. "You talked to them? And revived a tree? You?" Ron looked at Hermione, who looked like she was working through several things simultaneously. Then he looked back at Harry. "Right. Okay. Were you in danger at any point?" Harry considered this honestly. "One of them cast the killing curse." Ron made a sound. "I stepped around it," Harry said. Hermione closed her eyes for a moment. "You stepped around the killing curse. It's intent-driven. I can feel intent before it manifests. I just moved." He looked at her. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like you're going to give me gray hair before I'm 17, she said, and her voice was precise and exasperated, and underneath both of those things, something deeply and specifically relieved. She looked at him properly. "Are you genuinely all right?" "Yes," he said. "Genuinely." She held his gaze for a moment, reading him with the thoroughness she brought to everything. Then she nodded once and started walking toward the staircase with the brisk energy of someone channeling residual anxiety into forward motion. "I'm writing up everything I sensed from the South Ward line and cross-referencing it with the attack structure for the archive," she said. "We need a record." "Obviously," Ron said, and followed her, and Harry heard him say quietly to her as they went up the stairs, "He stepped around the killing curse, Hermione," and Hermione's response was a complicated sound that mixed admiration with the specific exhaustion of someone who has a highly capable and utterly uncontainable best friend. Luna found Harry that afternoon. He was at the lake, sitting on the rocks, the amber warmth beneath the water doing its quiet greeting, when she appeared beside him with the quality she had of arriving rather than approaching, like she was always already in the right place. She sat down next to him close enough that their shoulders were an inch apart, and looked out at the water. "I heard," she said. "About the attack or the tree?" "Both. I liked the tree part best." Harry looked at the water. The afternoon light on it was grey-gold, the same color as Luna's hair in this light, which he noticed without particularly deciding to. "The tree was just alive," he said again. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, you're not frightened?" "No. Even after today. Especially after today." He turned it over. "He sent 32 people and I had a conversation and they left. That's," he searched for how to say it accurately. "It's information. About where we are. About the ratio of what he can bring to what I am. I'm not saying it's over, I'm not saying he's not dangerous, he's going to adapt again, and the next thing he tries will be different and he'll have thought harder about it." Harry looked at the water. "But every time he acts from fear of what I'm becoming rather than clear assessment of what I am, he makes a mistake. And I'm going to let him." Luna was quiet for a moment. The water moved between grey and gold. "My father called this morning," she said. "The ministry sent someone to the house. They wanted the blood analysis documentation." Harry's attention sharpened. "What did he do?" "He told them the documentation was his private scholarly record and they didn't have legal standing to access it." She paused. Then he quoted 17 precedents from Fey court law that Hermione had sent him. They left. She glanced at him sideways, and there was a small smile in it. He sounded very pleased with himself. He should be. Harry felt a warmth for Xenophilius that was specific and genuine. The man had been the first person to tell him a full, unfiltered truth about himself, and had done it at personal cost, and was apparently continuing to do it. "Is he safe?" "Dad is, harder to threaten than people expect. He survived a lot." A shadow crossed her face briefly, something that lived near grief without being consumed by it. "He knows how to take care of himself." Harry turned slightly toward her. "Luna. If the ministry comes back, he'll call me. And I'll tell you." She met his gaze directly, those wide silver eyes, steady and absolutely clear. "You're not the only one allowed to face things, Harry." He looked at her for a moment. The inch between their shoulders was still there and felt, suddenly, like something intentional rather than accidental. "I know," he said. "You've been facing things quietly since before I knew you existed." She looked back at the water. "You noticed," she said softly, and there was something in those 2 words that was much bigger than 2 words, a feeling of being seen after a long time of doing difficult things in a room where no one was paying attention. "I notice a lot more now than I used to," Harry said. He was aware of the warmth beside him, her specific presence, the quality of it that was entirely unlike anyone else's, the way it was gentle and odd and absolutely steady in ways that made you feel like the ground was reliable. "I noticed before. I just didn't always know what I was noticing." She turned to look at him, and the afternoon light did its grey-gold thing on her face, and Harry was aware that whatever the space between them had been building toward was arriving now, unhurried and certain, the way the season changes. He leaned toward her slightly, the kind of motion that is a question. She answered it by closing the inch. The kiss was brief and soft and tasted like the cold air and something warm underneath it, and when it ended they both looked at the lake for a moment in the comfortable quiet of people who have just done something that was exactly right. "I've been waiting for that since 3rd year," Luna said. Harry laughed, the surprised, real kind. "You knew since 3rd year. I told you. I see things." She leaned her head against his shoulder in the matter-of-fact way she did everything. "The tree," she said. "Can you really feel them? All of them?" Harry reached downward, not physically, just with the awareness, through the rock and the cold soil to the roots and the deep slow water table below, and felt the forest's edge, where the oak with its new green leaves was standing. He felt it clearly, the specific aliveness of it, roots and trunk and branch, slightly younger in its center where the new growth had started. "Yes," he said. All of them. That's lovely, Luna said simply. They sat by the lake until the light went, and the castle threw its warm gold out across the water, and the amber warmth below the surface pulsed in its patient rhythm. Dumbledore was waiting in the corridor when Harry got back. Not in his office, in the corridor, standing at the top of the stairs from the entrance hall, hands folded in his robes, looking like a man who has spent the day deciding something. Harry stopped on the step below him and looked up. You handled the attack, Dumbledore said. Yes. Without casualties. Without significant damage to the wards. A pause. Without your wand, from what I'm told. I used it at the ward seam anchor. Mostly not otherwise. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. In the lamplight he looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, and Harry wondered if that was a change in Dumbledore or a change in Harry's ability to see him clearly. I watched from the window, Dumbledore said. The east grounds. I saw you step through the ward. Harry waited. You've changed, Dumbledore said. Not with any particular tone, just as an observation, accurate and plain. I've woken up, Harry said. It's different. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again it was with a quality Harry had not heard from him before, a careful, genuine difficulty, the voice of someone setting down something heavy. I was wrong, he said. Not in everything. But in this, in the binding, in the keeping of it, I was wrong. He held Harry's gaze. I told myself it was protection. For 15 years I told myself that, and it was true enough in the early years and became, habit. Justification. He paused. I am sorry, Harry. Harry stood on the step and felt the apology, not for what it meant about Dumbledore, but for what it said about truth, about how long people can make peace with something wrong if they believe the motive behind it is good. He didn't feel anger at it. He felt something more like comprehension. I believe you, Harry said. That you meant to protect me. I believe it. He met those blue eyes, which were genuinely weathered now, genuinely uncertain in a way they usually were not. But you don't get to do it that way again. Whatever comes next, Voldemort, the Ministry, the courts, all of it, you talk to me. Fully. Not a managed version. Yes, Dumbledore said. And if you can't do that, I can, Dumbledore said. And Harry felt him, felt the quality of the old man's intent in the way he could feel everything now, and what he felt was genuine. Troubled, old, recalibrating, but genuine. I believe I can, now. Harry nodded. Then we'll figure this out together. He looked at him steadily. But understand, I'm not doing it your way or the Ministry's way or the court's way. I'm doing it my way, and the rest of you will have to keep up. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, real amusement, a little rueful, and underneath it something that Harry thought might be relief. That, Dumbledore said, with the ghost of his usual warmth, I can work with. Harry moved past him up the stairs. At the top, without turning, he said, Voldemort's going to try something different next. Soon. He's intelligent and he adapts fast and this was a test run. I know, Dumbledore said below him. We should talk tomorrow. Properly. No careful versions. Tomorrow, Dumbledore agreed. Harry walked up toward Gryffindor Tower and felt the castle around him, 347 sleeping and waking lives, old magic in old stone, the ward seam on the eastern hill bright and fey-warm and solid, the lake below with its amber patience, the forest pressing its immense living weight against the perimeter. He felt something else too. At the edge of his range, far to the north, the dark turned attention of Voldemort, and in it a quality he hadn't felt before in it, not rage, not calculation, but the specific texture of someone tearing up a plan and starting again. Good, Harry thought. Start again. You'll still arrive at the same answer. In the dormitory, everyone was asleep except Neville, who was sitting up in bed with a book and jumped slightly when Harry came in. He looked at Harry for a moment with the expression of someone who had spent the day hearing fragmentary, escalating accounts of the morning's events and was trying to reconcile them with the person who just walked through the door and looked entirely ordinary. "The tree," Neville said. "It came back." "Yes," Harry said. Neville nodded slowly, in the way he nodded when something confirmed an instinct he'd been sitting with quietly. "I thought," he started, then stopped. "What?" Neville looked at his book. "I've been thinking about the plants in the greenhouses. There's one in the back. Professor Sprout thinks it's past saving. Root rot, been going for months." He glanced up. "I don't know if what you did with the tree was, if it works like that, if it's specific to, show me tomorrow," Harry said. "After breakfast." Neville looked at him. He smiled, the kind of smile Neville had that was surprised every time it appeared, like it kept catching him off guard. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Harry got into bed and lay in the dark and felt the night. The amber warmth in his blood was steady and bright and fully his. Outside, the grounds were quiet, the ward strong, the old fey elements in the castle walls carrying a hum he could feel now the way you feel a note when the right string is plucked. 3 weeks, Seraphine had said. Maybe less now. The morning had pushed something forward, drawn something out faster than a slow progression would have. He could feel it in himself, the way you feel a tide coming in, the power and the clarity of it building with each day, each session, each accumulated moment of being fully and unequivocally what he was. Voldemort was adapting. The Ministry was concerned. The court was watching. Harry Potter was sleeping well. That, he thought, settling into the pillow with the ease of someone whose conscience and capability were currently in perfect alignment, said everything that needed saying. Chapter 5, The Prince Chooses. The summons came on a Thursday morning, and it came from 3 directions at once, which Harry thought was almost impressive in its timing. The first was a ministry owl, formal, red-sealed, the kind that hovers until acknowledged because it has been charmed to be persistent and slightly aggressive. The letter inside was written in the careful bureaucratic language that meant someone very senior had dictated it while trying not to show how unsettled they were. It requested Harry's presence at the Ministry of Magic at his earliest convenience for a classification and status review, which was ministry language for we don't know what category to put you in and it is making us extremely uncomfortable. Signed by Cornelius Fudge, countersigned by 3 department heads. The second was a fake communication, not a letter, not an owl, but a pulse through the amber warmth in his blood, arriving the way the court's recognitions always arrived, in language below language. It carried a formal quality he hadn't felt before, the specific gravity of a summons rather than a greeting. The sovereign seat requesting his attendance. Not demanding, the court didn't demand from its own blood, but requesting with the weight of something that had been patient for 500 years and had arrived at the end of its patience. The third was a folded piece of parchment slipped under the door of his dormitory, in handwriting he didn't recognize at first until he saw the specific formation of the letters, archaic, precise, slightly wrong for modern script in the way that very old habits of handwriting are wrong. It took him 3 seconds to place it. Voldemort. The note was short. 4 sentences. Harry read it twice standing in his dormitory in the early gray light, Ron still asleep across the room, and then he sat on the edge of his bed and thought. You have become something remarkable. This was inevitable, regardless of the suppression. I write not as an enemy but as someone who understands what you are better than the humans around you do. Meet me. Alone. Discuss the shape of what comes next, before others decide it for us both. Harry folded it. He held it for a moment, feeling the quality of it, not a trap, exactly, though it was certainly also a trap. Underneath the trap was something genuine, which was the disturbing part. Voldemort genuinely believed what he'd written. He genuinely thought that 2 immortal beings, or 1 immortal and 1 pursuing it, might have more in common with each other than with the temporary humans making decisions on their behalf. He was wrong. But he believed it, and that was important information. Harry got dressed, went downstairs to the common room, and found Seraphine already there, sitting in an armchair by the fire as though she'd been in the castle long enough to develop sitting in armchairs habits, which she absolutely had not. She looked at him when he came in. "You've had a busy morning," she said. "3 summonses before breakfast," Harry said. "The Ministry, the Court, and Voldemort." She held out her hand. He gave her the folded parchment. She read it without expression and handed it back. "He wrote it himself," she said. "Not a proxy. Not a dictated message. The intent in the ink is his." "I know." Harry sat in a chair across from her. The fire was low, the common room empty, the pre-dawn gray coming through the windows. "He wants a conversation. He wants a conversion," Seraphine said precisely. "He wants to sit across from you and make the argument that your interests and his are aligned. It's the same logic he used on every Death Eater he ever recruited, find the point of genuine resonance between his vision and their desire and pull on it." She looked at him. "He's not stupid. With you, the genuine resonance he'll aim for is sovereignty. The argument that wizarding world institutions have been managing you, suppressing you, defining you without your consent. Which is true. He'll use true things to get you toward a very wrong conclusion." "I'm aware," Harry said. "I know you are." She studied him. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm going to respond to all 3 summonses," Harry said. "Today. And I'm going to set the terms for all 3 of them rather than accepting any of theirs." Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walk me through it." He did. She listened without interrupting, which was her way of indicating she was taking something seriously. When he finished, the fire had grown slightly and the first real light was starting at the windows. "The court will agree," she said. "The sovereign seat requested your attendance, they're not going to be troubled by you setting a location and time. The Ministry will resist. The Ministry will have to stop resisting when you remind them of what your legal standing means for their jurisdiction over this matter." She paused. "I'll be present for the Ministry meeting. Not as an emissary. As a witness for the court." "That'll frighten them," Harry said. "Yes," she agreed, with a calm that suggested this was a feature rather than a flaw. "And Voldemort," Harry said. "He'll come." She said it without doubt. "If you set the terms and the location and he agrees, he'll keep it. He's many things but his word, when he gives it, which is rare, holds. He gave it here." She looked at the folded note. "He said meet me. If you say I'll meet you, here are my conditions, he'll evaluate them and either accept or counter. He won't ignore it. He's expecting to make the argument in private," Harry said. "Alone," he said. "Which is precisely why it shouldn't be alone," Seraphine said. "And precisely why he'll hate that condition most and agree to it anyway, because the alternative is having his proposal rejected outright." She looked at Harry. "He'll accept witnesses because accepting them and still making his argument demonstrates confidence. He won't be able to resist the opportunity." Harry nodded. He stood up. "Tell the court, this afternoon, 4 o'clock, the edge of the forest at the old oaks. That's home ground for the recognition and it has the right quality for what the court needs." "Done," she said. "Ministry, I'll send an owl. 10 o'clock this morning. I'll need Hermione in that meeting. Obviously. And Voldemort." Harry looked at the folded note. "I'll write back this morning. Tonight, 9 o'clock, Hogwarts grounds, the south shore of the lake. He comes with no more than 2. I bring the same." Seraphine tilted her head fractionally. "You're compressing all 3 into one day. He said before others decided for us both. That's the argument he's planning to make, that the court and the Ministry will shape this situation to their interests and not mine, and I should move first by moving with him." Harry set the note down on the armchair. "I'm going to demonstrate, today, that I can handle all 3 at once on my own terms. That no single party in this is going to define what I am or what I do. Including him." Seraphine looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she stood, smoothed her traveling clothes, and said, "I'll contact the court. Write your letters. Eat breakfast, a pause, the specific pause of someone quoting a third party. Luna will say the same. Harry almost smiled. She said it every significant morning for 3 weeks. Sensible girl, Seraphine said, and moved toward the portrait hole with the unhurried certainty that characterized everything she did. Harry sat back down and thought for another 5 minutes, very carefully and very clearly, about all of it. The shape of the day. What each meeting needed to accomplish, what each party needed to be shown, what could not be compromised and what could flex. He thought about the specific weight of each relationship, Ministry's institutional fear, the court's ancient patience, Voldemort's brilliant damaged vision of a world reorganized around the survival of what he considered exceptional. He thought about what he wanted. Not what was tactically optimal, what he, Harry Potter, Fey Prince, eternal heir, person, wanted from the day that was coming. He picked up a quill and started writing. Ron's face when Harry explained the plan over breakfast was a journey through at least 6 distinct emotional states, culminating in resigned admiration. Hermione's was more controlled but no less expressive. She read the Ministry letter, read Harry's drafted response, read the Voldemort note, and sat very still for 30 seconds before looking up. Today, she said. Yes. All 3. Yes. She pressed her lips together. Then she looked at Ron. Then back at Harry. Right. I'll need 2 hours to prepare for the Ministry meeting. I've been building the legal framework for 3 weeks and I want to have every precedent organized before we walk in. You have 2.5, Harry said. We leave at 9:30. Tell me everything you want out of that meeting, specifically, so I'm not predicting. Classification dropped. The Ministry formally acknowledging Fey court jurisdiction in matters of bloodline status. No further interference from Umbridge, formally, on record, in anything related to my heritage. He paused. And access to my family file. Everything they have on my parents, on the binding, on the original registration of the Potter name in 1420. Hermione wrote it down, rapidly, already organizing. The 1420 registration, that's the manufactured entry Xenophilius found. The Ministry archives may have the original source document. That's why I want it. She nodded, still writing. I'll build the framework around the sovereignty precedent first, it's the strongest. If we establish that before anything else, the rest follows. She looked up. Fudge is going to be extremely uncomfortable. Fudge is going to be cooperative, Harry said pleasantly. Ron made the face he made when Harry said things in that particular tone. You're doing the thing again, he said. What thing? The thing where you say something that sounds polite but lands like a wall. He took a large bite of toast. I actually love the thing. Hermione gave him a look. Don't encourage it. The thing is objectively brilliant, Hermione. The thing is, she paused, considered, and could not find an effective counterargument. Fine. The thing is useful. The Ministry was everything it always was, grand and slightly anxious in the way institutions are anxious when they've built considerable architecture around a reality that is no longer accurate. Harry had been here for the hearing in his 2nd year of attending, for various order meetings, for the night in the Department of Mysteries that he still thought about sometimes in a way that had no comfortable resolution. He knew its proportions and its particular flavor of authority. He walked through the atrium with Hermione beside him and Seraphine a half-step behind, and he felt the Ministry around him, the hundreds of witches and wizards going about their contained, ordered professional lives, and he felt the building itself, old magic threaded through the stone, and underneath it, pressed into the foundation, the faint frustrated echo of things that had been decided badly here over centuries. People noticed Seraphine. They couldn't not notice Seraphine. She walked through the Ministry atrium the way she'd walked through Hogwarts's wards, without asking permission, simply continuing, and people moved without knowing why they were moving, making space for something that didn't announce itself but was unmistakably present. The meeting room was on level 2, which was the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's territory. Fudge was there with 2 department heads, a senior legal advisor, and, Harry noted, a woman from the Department of Regulation of Magical Creatures whose presence was obviously meant to remind Harry that there were frameworks for beings of uncertain classification. He found this almost charming. He sat down across from Fudge without preamble. Hermione sat beside him, her documents organized in a way that communicated, without being aggressive about it, complete preparedness. Seraphine stood at the corner of the room, which she'd clearly chosen to be maximally visible without being seated, and the creatures department woman looked at her with an expression that suggested the entire regulation framework had just become suddenly and dramatically irrelevant. Fudge opened with the Ministry's standard position, concern, classification, cooperation, the word voluntarily used 4 times in the first 2 minutes in ways that were obviously not describing a voluntary situation. Harry let him finish. He was, as he'd been for weeks, entirely patient with institutional anxiety while having absolutely no intention of accommodating it. "Minister," Harry said, when Fudge paused for breath. "I want to be direct, because I think directness is more respectful of everyone's time than the alternative." He looked at Fudge steadily. "I am formally recognized under Fey court law as heir to the eternal bloodline. That recognition occurred 3 weeks ago, witnessed and recorded. Under the Sovereignty Accords of 1203, Hermione." Hermione set a document on the table with the precision of someone laying down a perfect hand in a card game. "The Sovereignty Accords, signed between the British wizarding community and 3 Fey courts following the conflict of 1201, she said, in her clear, encyclopedic delivery. Article 7, recognized Fey bloodline members carrying hereditary standing of the prince rank or higher are classified as sovereign entities. Ministry jurisdiction in matters of classification, status review, or any restriction of movement, ability, or expression is formally excluded." She turned the page. "Ratified by the Ministry in 1203, never formally repealed, and as it predates the current Ministry Charter by 400 years, it cannot be superseded by subsequent legislation without Fey court agreement. Which has not been sought." The legal advisor had gone slightly pale. He was reading the document with the expression of a man who had hoped it didn't say exactly what it was saying. "The Ministry's classification review," Harry said, "doesn't have legal standing. I'm happy to have that confirmed formally, I'd actually prefer it on record." He looked at Fudge. "What I'm here to ask for today is this: 1. The formal cessation of all Ministry attempts to classify or review my status. 2. The complete transfer of my family's Ministry files to my custody, everything pertaining to the Potter bloodline going back to the initial 1420 registration." He paused. "And 3. The formal removal of Dolores Umbridge from any position that involves authority over me or my education." Fudge had been going through several colors during this. He settled into a kind of resigned pink. "Mr. Potter, Minister." Harry kept his voice friendly and clear. "The Ministry has a choice to make. It can cooperate with a recognized Fey sovereign, which, under the Accords, earns specific protections and commercial and diplomatic reciprocities that I suspect your Trade Department would find very interesting, or it can attempt to contest a legal standing that has been unchallenged for 800 years. He let a beat pass. "I'd like to think that's not a difficult choice." Seraphine, from her corner, said nothing. She simply was, in the room, ancient and present and entirely herself, and her being there was the final word in an argument she hadn't needed to speak. Fudge looked at the legal advisor. The legal advisor looked at the documents. He said, in the careful voice of someone who has just found a load-bearing wall in a building and discovered it was removed 3 weeks ago, "The Sovereignty Accords are valid." He swallowed. Incontestable. What followed was 2 hours of paperwork, which was the least dramatic and most consequential part of the day. Harry signed things. Hermione reviewed everything twice. Seraphine witnessed the court's portion of the documentation with a seal that the legal advisor handled with the reverence of someone touching something very old and very sharp simultaneously. By noon, Harry had everything he'd come for. Including a slim Ministry file, old and brown-edged, labeled Potter, Fleamont and Euphemia, bloodline registration, amended 1420 entry, restricted. He didn't open it in the ministry. He tucked it under his arm and walked out through the atrium with Hermione and Seraphine, and the atrium felt different from the one he'd walked into 3 hours ago, still grand, still slightly anxious, but recalibrated, the way a room recalibrates after something permanent has changed in it. Outside, Hermione let out a long breath. Fudge looked like he was going to cry, she said. He wasn't going to cry, Harry said. He was going to adapt. Fudge is, he's not a bad man. He's a frightened one. Frightened men adapt when you make the adaptation easier than the alternative. Hermione looked at him sideways. When did you get so, she started, then stopped. What? Politically fluent, she said. It sounded like it had cost her something to say, in the best way. 3 weeks with Seraphine, Harry said. Seraphine, from behind them, said, don't give me credit. This is native. I simply stopped some of the things that were in the way of it. They were back at Hogwarts by 2. Harry ate a sandwich standing in the kitchen, which the house elves found alarming and accommodating in equal measure, read the first 20 pages of the ministry file, which confirmed everything Xenophilius had found and added several things he hadn't, including the specific date of the original binding and a note in Dumbledore's handwriting that was careful and pained and said, simply, for his safety, until the time is right, and then went to find Luna. She was in the greenhouses, of all places, helping Neville with the dying plant. Harry stopped in the doorway of Greenhouse 3 and watched them for a moment, Neville with his hands in the soil, focused and careful, Luna crouching beside him with her head tilted, saying something in a low voice about root systems that Harry couldn't fully hear. He stepped in. The plant in question was in the back corner, a large spreading thing in a terracotta pot, its leaves yellowed and drooping, the soil around it gray. He crouched beside Neville and felt downward, through the pot, the soil, the root ball, and found the root rot Neville had described, a cold dead spreading from the center. May I? He asked Neville. Neville looked at him and then at the plant and nodded with the wordless trust of someone who has decided to believe in something and is committed to it. Harry put both hands in the soil. He didn't think about the technique of it, he'd stopped thinking about technique, mostly, and started thinking about the thing itself, the actual aliveness of what was in front of him. He felt the rot and he felt past it to what was still living, tendrils of root deep in the pot that were still green and holding, and he gave them what he'd given the oak, warmth, the specific fey warmth that was life-resonant in a way he couldn't explain technically and didn't need to. It moved down his arms into his hands into the soil and through the roots like water finding its natural path. Nothing dramatic. The plant didn't surge or glow. Its leaves stopped moving in the slight greenhouse breeze and then resumed, and they were a fractionally better color than they'd been 30 seconds ago. Not healed, not in one session, this would take time, but alive in a more committed way than it had been. Neville sat back on his heels and stared at the plant with a complicated expression. It feels different, he said. The rot's not gone, Harry said. But it's not spreading. Give it a week of this and it should be clear. Neville looked at him. His expression was the Neville expression, quietly moved by things that other people might have made a larger performance of. Thank you, he said simply. The oak was your idea, really, Harry said. You asked and I thought about it and realized I could do it deliberately rather than by accident. He stood up and brushed soil from his hands. Thank you for asking. Luna stood up beside him. She took his hand in a matter-of-fact way and held it, and Neville looked at their joined hands with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this development for some time and was pleased to have it confirmed. The family file? Luna asked. Everything Xenophilius found and more, Harry said. Including the binding's original date and a note from Dumbledore about his reasoning. He paused. He knew the time would come. He wrote it into the note, until the time is right. He was planning to tell me. He just ran out of a version of me to tell it to before the right time arrived. Luna squeezed his hand once. What did it feel like? Reading it? Harry thought about this properly, in the greenhouse with the smell of soil and growing things around them. Like understanding a map of somewhere you've already been, he said. Not new information about a new place. Explanation of terrain you already crossed. She nodded, which was her way of saying that made complete sense even though it might not have to most people. Tonight, Harry said. I know, she said. I'm coming. He looked at her. Luna, you said I'm not the only one allowed to face things. She looked at him steadily, those silver eyes entirely serious. You meant it. So did I. A pause. I'll stay back. I won't be in the direct conversation. But I'm coming. He looked at her for a long moment. He felt her presence, that gentle, immovable quality, the way she was entirely herself in all circumstances and made no accommodation to fear because she decided, at some level, that her own clear seeing was more protection than any defensive posture. He thought about arguing and understood immediately that it was pointless, not because she was stubborn but because she was right. Stay with Ron, he said. South side of the lake. She smiled. Obviously. The forest at 4 o'clock was the forest at the edge of itself, the light going gold and amber in the canopy, the old oaks by the recognition site casting long shadows, the air carrying the cold bite of coming evening. Harry stood at the threshold between the old oaks and felt the sovereign seat arrive the way he'd felt it before, through the changed quality of the air, the pressure shift of something immense crossing from one kind of existence into proximity with another. Seraphine stood at his right. She was in full court attire, he'd never seen it before, the dark deep water cloth with its gold amber thread, the 3 rings that weren't rings carrying their particular resonance. She looked, in this context, not like the sharp pragmatic teacher he'd been working with for 3 weeks but like what she actually was, something old and vast wearing a manageable form. The sovereign seat's presence settled between the oaks. Its quality was different than the recognition night, less observational, more engaged, carrying the specific weight of a proceeding rather than an acknowledgement. It spoke in the below words language and Harry received it clearly, without effort, the translation arriving as understanding rather than words. The line has awakened. The heir stands complete. The court calls to account the suppression of hereditary sovereignty lasting 5 centuries, 3 decades, and 14 days. Does the heir bring claim? Harry thought about it for exactly 1 second. Yes, he said, in the Fey language that still felt like his own name. I bring claim. Not for retribution, the suppression is ended and the one who cast it is no longer my enemy but my ally, under conditions I've set. He paused. I bring claim to confirm standing and to establish terms of engagement between the court and the human institutions that operate in the same territory. A pause. The presence considered. The heir understands his position. I understand that I stand in 3 worlds simultaneously, Harry said. Fey blood, wizard training, human life. I'm not going to choose between them. I'm going to work from all 3. He looked at the presence directly, or in the direction of where directly applied. I'm asking the court to recognize that the most effective expression of this bloodline is one that operates across the threshold rather than solely within the court's domain. I'm not abdicating. I'm not refusing my lineage. I'm telling you what it looks like when it's fully alive rather than managed. Another pause. Seraphine was very still at his right. The heir speaks as a prince, the presence said, and there was something in it that Harry could only describe as warmth, deep and ancient and specifically directed. The court hears and recognizes. Go as you choose. The court stands behind the line. Then, the blood debt owed by the bindings caster, does the heir release it? Harry thought about Dumbledore in the corridor last night, the genuinely weathered face, the apology that had cost him something real. He thought about a man who had made a wrong decision for a reason he genuinely believed was right, and had spent 15 years not quite finding the moment to correct it, and had been corrected by circumstance instead. He thought about the note in the ministry file, until the time is right. Released, Harry said. Fully. The warmth in his blood surged once, a pulse of approval, the court acknowledging a prince exercising his sovereign right to extend mercy, which was not weakness but its own kind of power, and then settled into its usual steady amber. The presence withdrew. The air between the oaks was just air again. An owl called somewhere in the forest canopy. Seraphine let out a breath that was not quite a sigh but was adjacent. "Smoothly done," she said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised," she said. She paused, and looked at him with the amber eyes, and the professional neutrality had put down its tools for a moment and wasn't pretending about anything. "I've been waiting for you for a long time, Harry. Not just professionally." She paused. "My mother was a scholar. She documented this bloodline when its concentration was at 32%, 5 generations ago. She always said the full expression would be extraordinary. I told her it was wishful thinking. A beat. I was wrong." Harry looked at her. "Your mother knew my bloodline." "She loved your bloodline," Seraphine said, and said it with the directness of someone for whom love is a precise term rather than a large vague one. She would have been pleased. The professional neutrality reclaimed itself, but gently. "Shall we go? You have a meeting at 9. The south shore of the Black Lake at 9 at night was cold and very dark, the castle's lights reflecting in the water from across, the forest pressing its breathing dark mass against the northern bank. Harry stood at the water's edge with Seraphine on his right and Ron on his left, and he felt Hermione and Luna on the slight rise behind him, Hermione with her wand and her organized mind and her loyalty that ran deeper than her comfort zone, Luna with her bare feet on the cold rock and her silver-clear seeing in her hand, earlier that afternoon, warm in his. He felt Voldemort's approach from the south, actually walking, on foot, through the grounds, having apparently accepted the terms. He came with 2, Harry felt them as shadows flanking a presence that was everything its reputation said and something more, because the reputation was made by frightened people and frightened people always simplify what they fear. What Harry felt coming toward him was not a monster. It was a man who had been extraordinary, had been terrified of dying, and had become something that was neither alive nor dead in the service of not dying, and was now fundamentally alone in a way that was beyond consolation. He felt that clearly. He didn't pity it. He understood it. Voldemort stepped out of the shadows at the south shore with the 2 flanking presences, Bellatrix and someone Harry didn't know, large and silent, and stood 10 feet from Harry and looked at him. He had improved since the Department of Mysteries. The body was more settled, the magic more controlled, the specific disturbing wrongness of his presence less rawly desperate and more calculated. He was trying, Harry noticed, to present an image of composure, which meant the composure was not entirely natural, which was important information. He looked at Harry with those flat red eyes and Harry looked back with his ordinary green ones and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You came," Voldemort said. His voice was the same, cold, precise, carrying that resonance that most people found paralyzing. "You asked," Harry said. "You set conditions. You accepted them." Voldemort's eyes moved to Seraphine, then to Ron, then back to Harry. "I said alone. You said meet. I set the terms." Harry tilted his head slightly. "You came anyway. Which means you had something to say that was worth the adjustment." A pause. In the pause Harry felt Voldemort recalibrate, felt the specific quality of an extremely intelligent mind encountering something it hadn't fully modeled and updating rapidly. He'd expected defensiveness, perhaps, or apology for the terms, or some version of the anxious deference people usually performed in this man's presence. He was getting none of those things, and the absence of them was, Harry could feel it, interesting to him. "You know what I want," Voldemort said. "I know what you've been planning," Harry said. "The binding strategy. Acquisition rather than destruction. You want an immortal Fey prince that answers to you, because with that you have something that can't be killed and won't age and can stand between you and everything you're afraid of indefinitely." He paused. "It's actually a logical strategy. If it were going to work. And you know why it won't. You can't bind what knows it's being bound," Harry said. "The working requires the subject to be unaware of the mechanism. I've been aware of it since week 1. He looked at Voldemort steadily. But that's not actually what I want to talk to you about. Voldemort's expression shifted fractionally, the curiosity that he usually concealed but couldn't entirely, the quality of someone who has spent decades operating in a landscape where genuine surprise is rare and has just experienced it. What do you want to talk about, he said. It wasn't quite a question. What this ends with, Harry said. Not tonight, the whole of it. Where it goes. He looked at him directly. You've been planning around me since my first year. Partly because of the prophecy, partly because you understood before anyone that I wasn't what the wizarding world thought I was. You've been right about the second part. He paused. The prophecy is a different conversation. Tonight I want to know if you're capable of having a conversation that doesn't end in one of us trying to end the other. Voldemort was very still. That's a strange question from someone who just turned back 32 of my best. Turned back, Harry said. Not destroyed. Not harmed. Turned back. That was a choice. He let that sit. Every choice I've made since the binding came off has been about what I'm building, not what I'm tearing down. I want you to notice that. And what are you building? Voldemort said, and his voice had a quality that Harry hadn't heard in it before, not warmth, nothing that's simple, but something like genuine engagement, an intellect meeting something it found worth meeting. A world where being extraordinary doesn't require destroying everything ordinary to prove it, Harry said. Where the wizarding world and the Fey courts exist in a real relationship rather than mutual ignorance. Where half-bloods and muggleborns and every other person the Death Eater framework considers disposable gets to be actually alive. He looked at Voldemort and said it plainly, without heat. A world where you could have been different, if anyone had managed to show you a version of powerful that didn't require being alone. Silence. The lake moved quietly behind them. An owl called in the forest. Something happened in Voldemort's face. It was brief, very brief, the kind of involuntary expression that arrives before the control can catch it, the kind that reveals the original person underneath the constructed one. Pain, and not the performative kind. Real and old and specific, the pain of someone hearing a door described that closed on them a very long time ago. Then it was gone. The control reclaimed it. He looked at Harry with the flat red eyes and his voice, when it came, was careful and precise. You're not afraid of me, he said. No. You should be. Why? Harry asked, simply and without challenge. You can't kill me past a certain threshold of awakening, you've done the research, you know that's true. The binding strategy is gone. You came here on my terms. He looked at him. What are you, to me, right now, that requires fear? Another silence. Harry felt the two flanking presences, Bellatrix with her particular brand of passionate instability, the unknown large one carrying a cold professional quality. He felt them monitor the conversation without intervening, which meant Voldemort had told them not to, which was its own statement. What do you want from this meeting? Voldemort said. The same thing I want from all 3 meetings today, Harry said. To establish where everyone actually stands so we can stop operating from assumptions. He looked at him directly. You are going to keep trying things. I know that. You're not going to stop because I asked nicely. I'm not asking nicely. He paused. I'm telling you that every strategy you've built around me is going to fail, specifically and technically, and I can tell you exactly why if you want to have that conversation. And I'm telling you that the war you're running, the Death Eater framework, the Muggleborn persecution, the dominance architecture, is going to end, and it's going to end badly for everyone involved including you, and I can tell you exactly why that's true too. He paused. Or. Voldemort's eyes narrowed fractionally. Or you're brilliant enough to see that the framework you built was a response to fear and that the fear has a source and the source is the same wound that every orphan who was told they were nothing carries. Harry said it quietly and without apology. And brilliant enough to understand that an immortal built from fear is still a thing built from fear, and that's not an ending anyone wants. He paused. I'm not offering you redemption. I'm not that naive. I'm telling you that the version of this story where you and I tear each other apart until one of us wins has a word count you don't want to read to the end of. And you're intelligent enough to know it. The silence this time was longer. The lake moved. The cold was real and specific, and the amber warmth in Harry's blood was steady and bright and entirely sure of itself. You're 15, Voldemort said. 60% immortal, Harry said. Which makes the arithmetic complicated. And something happened then that Harry had not predicted and that he suspected Voldemort had not predicted either. Voldemort laughed. It was brief, one short exhalation, almost entirely controlled, the sound of an intellect being caught genuinely off guard. It was, Harry thought, probably the most human thing he'd done in decades. It didn't resolve anything. It didn't fix anything. But it was real, and real things were better raw material than false ones. I'll think, Voldemort said. About what you've said. That's all I'm asking, Harry said. This isn't over. I know. But tonight we had a conversation instead of a catastrophe, and that's, Harry considered, a different kind of data point than either of us expected. Voldemort looked at him for one more moment, long, measuring, something complex moving behind the flat red eyes. Then he turned and walked back into the dark, the two flanking presences moving with him, and within 30 seconds Harry could feel them leaving the grounds, moving south, the cold presence of them receding like a tide going out. Ron let out a breath that had been contained for approximately 4 minutes. That was the scariest thing I've ever watched that ended with him just leaving, he said. He's not done, Harry said. Obviously. But he left. Yes. Hermione had come down from the rise and was standing beside Ron, her wand still in her hand, her expression the comprehensive one that meant she was filing everything simultaneously. You made him laugh, she said. It surprised him, Harry said. I think being surprised is the most useful thing you can do to Voldemort. He's been operating from certainty for so long that surprise is genuinely disorienting. The speech about the wound and the fear, Hermione started. Was true, Harry said. And he knew it was true. That's why it landed. He paused. I didn't say it to win him over. I don't think he's winnable, not in any clean sense. I said it because it's accurate, and accurate things have a quality to them that false things don't, and even Voldemort can feel the difference. Luna had come down the slope and was standing beside Harry in the dark, the lake at their backs, her shoulder against his. She didn't say anything. She was looking at the spot where Voldemort had stood with the particular quality she brought to things she found significant, seeing something in the empty space that wasn't immediately obvious. What? Harry asked her. He heard you, she said. Not just the words. He heard you. She paused. It won't be enough, probably. He's too far gone for one conversation. But it was a thread. You gave him a thread and he took it, even if he doesn't know that yet. Harry looked at the empty dark where Voldemort had stood. He thought about a brilliant terrified boy in an orphanage being told he was nothing, and what that boy had built to prove it wasn't true, and how the building had consumed the boy entirely. He thought about another boy in a cupboard under the stairs being told the same thing, and what different materials he'd had access to when it came time to build. Maybe, he said. Threads are enough, Luna said. Most things start with threads. He took her hand. The amber warmth in his blood was steady and the lake pulsed its recognition beneath the black water and the castle threw its gold across the surface, and behind them Ron was saying something to Hermione about the complete improbability of their lives, and Seraphine stood at the edge of the group in the dark with the expression she'd been developing over 3 weeks, the one that wasn't quite professionally neutral anymore and wasn't quite something else yet, and the night was cold and alive. And very, very real. Harry looked at the castle. His home, not the only one, now, but the first one he'd chosen, and choosing made it different from everything else. He looked at the lake with its court beneath the surface and the forest with its huge slow-breathing life and the old ward seam on the eastern hill still bright with fey warmth. 3 meetings. 3 different claims on what he was and where he stood. The ministry's institutional claim, dropped. The court's ancient patient claim, acknowledged on his terms. Voldemort's acquiring claim, refused, and something left in its place that wasn't surrender and wasn't victory but was real. He wasn't done. None of this was done. Voldemort would think and adapt and come back with something new, and the ministry would have difficulty adjusting to its adjusted understanding of Harry's position, and the court would continue its ancient patient involvement in the affairs of the world it stood behind, and Seraphine would make the training harder tomorrow morning, and Hermione would build a legal archive that no one had built before, and Ron would keep his intelligence network running and deliver daily briefings with the focused satisfaction of someone who has discovered a skill, and Neville's plant would take a week to fully clear, but it would clear, and Luna would see things nobody else was seeing and say them in her precise, unhurried way, and that was all right. All of that was more than all right. Harry Potter, 63.3% Fey Prince, heir to the eternal bloodline, legally sovereign entity under law that predated civilization as most people understood it, stood at the edge of the Black Lake on a cold Thursday night and felt everything, the castle and the grounds and the water and the forest and the specific, irreplaceable warmth of the people beside him, and thought, clearly and completely and without any uncertainty, this is mine. Not in the way of ownership. In the way of belonging. And I choose it. Ron clapped him on the shoulder. Can we go inside now? I literally cannot feel my feet. Yes, Harry said. Let's go in. They walked back toward the castle, the gold light growing ahead of them, the amber warmth steady in Harry's blood, the night settling in behind them like something that has witnessed what it needed to witness and is now at ease. The door opened before he touched it.